This is the Thursday, November 12, 2009, meeting of the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals. Will you call the roll, please?
Joanna Croft.
Here.
Holly Sozo.
Here.
Timothy Bigg.
Here.
Dean Cars.
Here.
Thomas Van Flyne. Kenneth Burkhart.
Here.
Daniel Freitas. And Jeff Braun.
Here. We have before us, under Agenda Item B, the minutes from the Thursday, October 8, 2009, Zoning Board meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review those minutes? And are there any comments on those? Or if not, could I have a motion to approve those minutes? All right, I gotta see what's up. Mr. Ron, thank you, has moved to approve the minutes. Ms. Croft has seconded. Is there any opposition to approval of the minutes? If not, the minutes are approved. Moving on to Item C on our agenda, special order of business, executive sessions. Item 1, disclosures. Do we have any disclosures to discuss? Ms. Suzo.
Yes, I have two disclosures. The first is on the Engelhart matter. We received public comments after the staff report was written, and the comments came from an individual who is a client of our firm, of my law firm.
And do you feel that the fact that the comments from your client would impact your providing an unbiased judgment on the case?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, thank you.
The second conflict that I have is on case number 2009-140. And here we have a situation where Dowell is a company that has been a client of our firm, as well as often a related party. And we've also have some of the commentary is from another client of the firm as well.
A client of your firm or
a client of our firm submitted one of the comments. I was unable to touch base with the attorney that represents that individual, so I don't want to identify, because I'm not sure if that type of disclosure has been permitted by that individual.
Do you feel you would you have a conflict with hearing that case?
I think I do with that case, given our relationship with Dowell. I think it may pose a problem.
All right. So, if that's the case, what's your position? Will you intend to recuse yourself from that case?
Recuse myself for that case.
Okay. That will put us at a five-person board for that specific case, and perhaps once we get to our public hearings, we can bring that case forward first to offer them an alternative.
Just a quick question on some of the other boards and committees that have a motion directing to participate for getting you all do that?
No, we haven't done that. Ms. Auteur, I guess, would look for some direction on your part as well. Would you see any reason that we wouldn't want to bring that case before us first during the public hearings to offer them a postponement?
Mr. Chairman, I understand that there's another case that has another member bringing forward another conflict, in which case that leaves a basic five-member board, which is considered to be a short board. It takes 5 votes to pass any motion. the board typically offers, in those cases, the opportunity to the applicant to either continue on, knowing that it takes 5 members, or to get a postponement, which does not cost them any money. It's just a 30-day postponement. But I see we have another member arrived, in which case we would not have a short board.
Yes. Hello. For the record, Mr. Van Flyne has just shown up. Nice to see you. Thank you. Okay, well, perhaps we'll continue through. I see Mr. Burkhart and Ms. Croft are on the docket for disclosures, so we can proceed with all our disclosures and see where we stand from there. Ms. Suzo, are you done disclosing?
I am done disclosing. The one thing I would ask is that if this ends up being if I end up being the only conflicted, is there, we can maybe consider moving the order, since moving the 04 case to the last case and moving 05 up, if that's okay with the petitioners, I would be greatly appreciative. But if not, I understand. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, we'll go through that. We
make a motion to...
Sure.
change.
Sure.
Okay.
Mr. Burkhart.
In case 2009-140, the case that Doll HKM is the representative, I'm one of the principals at KPB Architects, that Doll HKM is often a subconsultant to us on projects, and in other cases before us, that hasn't given rise to a conflict of interest. I think I'd be able to proceed on that in an unbiased manner. We would like to disclose that for the board's consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhart, and you have expressed that in the past and have acted on other cases in the same situation in the past. So, thank you.
And I've got one other item, which is unusual. I don't think it's any conflict at all, but I guess I'd want to bring it to the attention of the board that in case 2009-132, that was a variance request that was in the year 2000. There was a prior case on this property, and I was on the board at that time. But once again, I don't think that would prevent me from participating in that case.
I'm just in shock that you're that long in the tooth on this board, Mr. Burkhart, but appreciate that disclosure. Ms. Croft.
Yes, I have two items to discuss. As I mentioned last month, on agenda item F1, which is case 2009-115, that case was originally heard on August 13th. I was absent from that meeting, and I have not reviewed the minutes or tapes of that meeting, so I don't feel as if I can participate in that case. And on the second one, for the third time tonight in case 2009-140, my firm, Burkhart Croft Architects, also uses Dow HKM as a subconsultant on several projects, actually. I don't believe that will have any effect on my opinion in this particular case, but I did want to put it on the record.
Thank you, Ms. Croft. Mr. Vig.
Also on case 2009-140, my firm, where I'm a principal and the president of the company, competes on a number of projects against Dow HKM, and I just wanted to disclose that. I think I can be impartial in this matter, but I think I needed to get that out there.
Thank you, Mr. Vig. Are there any other disclosures? So based on what I've heard tonight, Ms. Croft will be recusing herself from agenda item F, item 01, case 2009-115, and Ms. Souza will be recusing herself from agenda item H4, case 2009-140. I believe, based on the head count and the recusals, we will not have a short board. We'll have 6 members for all of our cases. So we will proceed with hearing them all this evening. So that moves us on to our consent agenda. We have 2 resolutions for approval before us tonight. Resolution number 2009-026, case number 2009-112, and resolution number 2009-027, case number 2009-123. Could I have a motion to approve those resolutions? Thank you, Mr. Vig. And Mr. Burkhardt has seconded that motion. Is there any opposition to approval of those 2 consent agenda items? Seeing none, the consent agenda passes. And that moves us on to appearance requests. It moves us on to, there are no appearance requests. It moves us on to unfinished business, case 2009-115. I believe, Ms. Croft, you were going to recuse yourself from this one?
Yes, I need to.
Yes, thank you. Not trying to run you off.
That's fine.
This case, Ms. Alatour.
Yes, I'll be presenting for Ms. Chambers, who is not here this evening. Mr. Chairman, this is a case that was originally heard by the board August the 13th. The public hearing was closed. There was a motion to approve and then a motion to postpone to allow the petitioner to consider whether or not they would like to reduce the variance request. The original request was for an encroachment of 5 feet into a required 10-foot required yard setback. He has brought in a modified request to allow a 4-foot encroachment, and that is shown on, doesn't have a number, it's page D in the lower right-hand corner. And as you can see, it would bring it back to approximately, it would be 6 feet from the lot line. The department does not view this as a modification that we can support. For the same reasons found in the staff report, we find that standards 1, 2, 3, and 7 are not substantially met, and would recommend denial.
Thank you, Ms. Alatour. And just for clarification, this case came before us. We heard from the staff presentation. We heard from the applicant. The public hearing was opened and closed.
Correct.
However, I understand that there was a notice of public hearing that was sent out just in case there are any regarding the case hearing it tonight. Was that mailed out? I just want to be able to address that to the public.
Yes, it had been mailed out, but unless there is someone new in the audience that had not been heard previously, the board is not required to reopen the public hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Alatour. And that was for the audience. If there's anyone here, is there anyone here to speak on this case 2009-115 that has not spoken on it in the past. I don't see anyone indicating so. So with that in mind, I believe the matter rests with the board.
That's correct.
So with that, I'd like a positive motion from a board member, please. And for assistance, pages 9 and 10 speak to the summarize the department recommendations. And Mr. Burkhart has moved. Thank you, Mr. Burkhart. Mr. Ron has seconded. Thank you, Mr. Ron. Mr. Burkhart, would you speak to your motion, please?
In case 2009-115, I move that in the R3SL district, a variance from AMC 21.40.050G to allow a deck to encroach 4 feet at the maximum point of encroachment into the rear 10-foot required yard setback, subject to conditions 1 through 3, Department recommendations that start on page 9 and continue on to page 10 of the packet, with the correction that in item number 2, that the deck encroachment be reduced from 5 feet to 4 feet, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhart. And yes, I jumped the gun a little bit. Mr. Ron, you had seconded that. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Mr. Burkhart, would you speak to your motion, please?
I don't plan on supporting the variance, specifically in terms of findings of fact. I believe that standard 1 is met in that we had testimony from the petitioner that there are relatively few properties that have a retaining wall outside of their unit on this planned unit development, and I think that does give rise to standard 1 being met. Standard number 2, I agree with staff that I don't think that standard 2 is met. That this would, there isn't anything that's deprived of this applicant, and I think especially in terms of this being a planned unit development, in terms of setting a precedent for encroaching closer to the green space of the planned unit development, I think is a dangerous precedent, and so passing this variance would actually give this individual property owner rights above and beyond those other property owners in this complex. I don't believe standard 3 is met, that I think they do result from the actions of the applicant and his desire to build a larger deck than's required, than is permitted by the code. I agree with staff in that I think for a large degree that standard 4 is met, that I don't think it significantly affects the use of adjacent property. I don't believe standard 5 is met. I think there is the potential here for it to affect the character of the zoning district, having a much larger deck than the other units in this planned unit development, I think, is out of character. So I don't think standard 5 is met. I think standard 6 is met. I don't think there are any health or safety issues with this. And as far as standard 7, I don't think this is the minimum variance that will make possible a reasonable use of the land. As I recall, without a variance, a deck could be built something on the order of, I think, 7 feet in depth across the whole width of the house. And I think that is a reasonable use of the land. And so in this particular case, I don't think that a larger deck than what's permitted by the zoning variance can be supported, at least not in my mind.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhart. Mr. Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Along with Board Member Burkhart, I intend not to support the motion on the floor. Mr. Burkhart, or Board Member Burkhart, nicely summarized my position as well. I believe standards 2, 3, and 7 are the linchpin of my decision for not supporting the motion. As Board Member Burkhart spoke to, the potential for opening a door by perhaps providing an opportunity that's contrary to the plan development that we're dealing with, and allowing this encroachment is dangerous, if not more. And regarding standard 7 as well, the size of the deck being a perhaps almost 5-fold increase is definitely far from the minimum variance that will make it possible reasonable use of the land. So for those reasons, and those that Board Member Burkhart and staff have noted, I intend not to support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this motion? I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Seeing none, please vote. What's that?
Madam Clerk, I'll be voting no.
Okay.
I'm not logged on. I'm not logged on, is why.
Oh.
It's not recognizing my password. Oh, is it home? I thought it was my... All done. Oops, I meant...
Oh, sorry. Yeah. That motion fails. Five votes in favor are required to pass any motion, and there were 6 no votes for that. So that motion fails. I must read for the record, any party aggrieved by this decision has 30 days to appeal to Superior Court. The 30-day appeal period commences to run upon the mailing of the written decision. That moves us on in our agenda to H, public hearings. Mrs. Croft. Ms. Croft is coming back. And I want to, before we get into our public hearings, I would like to read the order of business for variances. The chair will introduce the case. The board will hear and rule on any objections to the sufficiency of notice. The board will hear a brief staff presentation outlining the case, not to exceed 10 minutes. The board may then question the staff. The applicant will give his or her presentation, not to exceed 10 minutes. Throughout the proceedings, the burden of proof rests on the applicant to convince the board by a preponderance of evidence that the variance should be granted. After the applicant's presentation, the board and the staff may question the applicant. The staff will have an opportunity to rebut the applicant's presentation, not to exceed 3 minutes. The board and the applicant may then question the staff. The applicant will then have an identical opportunity for rebuttal. The hearing will then be open for public testimony. Each person has 3 minutes. After the public hearing, the staff, followed by the applicant, have the right of rebuttal. Then the matter rests with the board. The chair asks for a positive motion from the board. Before we get to our first case, I believe, Ms. Suso, you had made a request to look into the possibility of switching the order of the agenda. Is that? That would be case 2009-140, case 2009-146. Ms. Auteur, what would be the procedure that we need to...
Mr. Chairman, the procedure is that you have to move to change the order and vote on it.
Okay. And is that just something that we as the board...
Yes.
...board would do? Okay. I guess I would like a motion to move to change the order of the agenda for the two cases. Ms. Suso.
I make a motion to move case 2009-146 to before case 2009-140 on tonight's agenda.
Thank you. And do we have a second? Thank you. Mr. Ron has seconded. I don't know if any discussion is necessary. Do we put this before Ms. Auteur?
Just a clarification. You moved item 4 to become item 5. Is that correct?
Yes.
I see. Thank you.
Yes. Is there any discussion any board members have? And is there any objection to moving to two items? Seeing none, we will move those two cases. That brings us to our first case this evening, which is case 2009-127. A variance for an encroachment into the required side yard setbacks. The petitioner is Thomas and Wanda Sanborn. Is the petitioner here this evening?
Yes, I am.
Could you, all right, I believe we'll have you come speak, give me your name and spell it for the record, and then we'll have you sit back down for a sec to have staff presentation.
Okay, my name is Thomas Sanborn, and the last name is spelled S-A-N-B-O-R-N.
Okay, thank you. We'll have the staff presentation, and then you'll be up in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Ms. Auteur, I believe this is your case. Could you provide us with the sufficiency of notice?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 55 public hearing notices were mailed out. In your packet, I believe there are 2 return comments, one speaking in favor, and the other is from the Community Council, who noted that they were not able to contact the abutting property owners and therefore could not make an informed comment. This is a piece of property located in the Birchwood area at 20844 Bowery Lane. The request is to allow an existing residential foundation to encroach 2.5 feet into the required 15-foot north side yard at the greatest point of encroachment, and to allow an accessory structure to be 5 feet from the principal structure when 10 feet is the minimum separation required. The property is zoned R9. It is a 2.5-acre BLM property. It is generally level excepting at the southwest corner. The existing structures on the property is a footing and foundation for a single-family home, and I believe there are 3 accessory sheds on the property. The BLM property was resurveyed and created in the 1950s. The patent was made available in 1963. There is no other history on the property until 2009, at which time an application was submitted for an on-site wastewater disposal system permit. That, in fact, was issued. 3 weeks later, they applied for a land use permit for construction of a large 3,600 square foot approximate, 3,600 square foot approximate single-family structure that would also include an accessory dwelling unit plus a garage. An enforcement case was opened in June based on a complaint that the structure was being constructed inside the 15-foot yard setback. On this property, as a BLM lot, there are two 50-foot patented right-of-way reserves, one along the south property line and one along the east lot line. There are no other easements adhering to the property, and it will be served with on-site systems. At the time that they applied for the on-site permit, their groundwater testing did indicate that there was ground water found, and one monitoring hole was there was no water, but there was on the second. And as I mentioned, he applied for a land use permit that was issued April of this year, and it was based on counter changes, meaning that these were changes made by the petitioner, changing the location of the footprint of the structure using a hand-corrected plot plan that was done in September of 2007. The plot plan that he also changed indicated that there was a 20-foot separation between the foundation to the lot line. The approval stamp by on the land use permit says, all work shall be done as shown on this plot plan. Approved plans and specifications shall not be changed, modified, or altered without first obtaining a valid change order. No change orders were requested or processed. The plot plan was actually, as I mentioned, done in 2007, and at that time they were not provided with building plans, but did show a sort of a generic location for a proposed structure that was approximately 42 by 130 feet. And it was set approximately 120 feet west of the east lot line and about 84 feet north of the south lot line, more central to the interior of the parcel. That plot plan did not show the presence of any well or septic or where the on-site permit had authorized the location. Further, it did not show any existing fences on or within the property. Later, an as-built was done, dated August 3rd of 2009, and it shows the existing poured concrete foundation. It also identified the 3 existing sheds, the test holes, the septic cleanouts and lift station, and the existing gravel driveway, the well and power pole and overhead power line. The dimensions of the foundation were changed from that was on the land use permit, and it, of course, shows the encroachment. We find that standards 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7 are substantially not met. The physical condition of the property for all intents and purposes, is unrelated to the variance. It is generally flat or level. It is a conforming lot in the R9. It has fringes of mature trees along the lot lines. The remainder of the site has generally been cleared of vegetation. It has no obstructing easements or any other types of platted issues that would have prevented the house from being located in a conforming manner. The slope across the property is less than 2%. Excepting at the southwest corner, where there is a rise in elevation where it meets Birchwood Loop Road. So topographically speaking, the house could have been placed in a lot of different conforming locations. I won't go through the other items. I think you can come to your own conclusions on that. I think the thing that is most that stands out the most is that it was the plot plan that he made these changes on that has actually created the problem, because he didn't build in accordance with that plot plan. If he had, then there would be no encroachment into that yard setback. We do recommend denial. If the board finds that the 7 standards are substantially met, we would recommend conditions 1 through 4 found on pages 12 through 13. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Autor. Are there any questions of staff by a board member? Mr. Burkhart.
Ms. Autor, I'm looking at page 2 of the packet, and do you have any knowledge in terms of the zoning pattern here, how it came to be that way in Birchwood Loop Road? Seems like it sort of bisects at least one of these R9 parcels, and I guess it seems somewhat unusual that 3 sides of this lot appear to be surrounded by R6, and then on the north we have an R9 parcel. That seems quite unusual to me. Is there any history on how that came to be?
Well, as you know, this is a part of the Birchwood area that is essentially mostly BLM lots. Birchwood Loop Road is not it's not a dedicated, platted road. It actually does wander through a number of lots, as you can see from page 2. It bisects the property south of this, and it leaves that little remnant essentially undevelopable for that lot owner. Why some of this is R9 and why some of this is R6, I don't know what the reason for that is, other than that probably is a historical pattern that has been out there for, well, since the early 80s. Typically, R9 is more slope affected than the R6, but if that were the case, then this property is improperly zoned and should be R6. But for all intents and purposes, it has more in common with R6 than it does with R9 with regard to the physical characteristics of topography, geology, and so forth. Most of the development in this is single residential. And there are a number of these lots that are either underdeveloped or not developed. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it goes a long way to doing that. Thank you.
Are there any other questions of staff? Mr. Van Flein?
Yes. In reviewing what the petitioner has stated was a reason for the incursion, he states that they were measuring off of a fence. Were you able to go out and verify the existence of the fence and its path in the sense that it wasn't truly on the property line?
Yes, through the chair, Commissioner Van Flein. I did go out and take a look at it, and the fence is clearly located on the property to the north, and it's more of a fence of convenience, meaning that whoever the owner was put it up probably to, it's not a very large fence, and it, of course, doesn't even follow the lot line on the north side. It's situated well inside of that lot by anywhere from 1.5 feet to maybe 3 feet. It does follow the tree line, if you could say that.
Is there a picture that you can point us to in the packet that might demonstrate this?
I believe there are photographs in there.
I see like a wire fence.
That's the fence.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Were there any discussions with the petitioner on your end about the possibility of, if his application is correct, that this fence had been in that position since 1969 of the land property boundary actually having changed through adverse possession?
No, I have not had no discussion with the petitioner on that point.
Okay. Thanks.
I believe we had pictures submitted to us under a separate packet. I don't know if you have that, but picture number 2, it looks like, show the foundation and then a wire fence on the right side of the drawing.
Mr. Chairman, I would add, though, that it's very clearly not included on the 2007 plot plan, which, if it had been on the property, would have been required by the surveyor to note that.
And is that on page 3? Is that page 3 of our packet,
Yes.
Ms. Autor?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And just so I'm clear, you're indicating that the fence itself has not been there since 1969?
I can't confirm the date of that fence because there's no record of it being on this property, nor is it shown. I mean, there's no way to, other than to say that the ownership of the fence clearly belongs to property BLM Lot 17 to the north.
Okay. Thanks.
Are there any other questions of staff? Ms. Autor, I just had one as a follow-up to Mr. Burkhart. What is the side yard setback for R6 property?
The R6 is, I believe, 25 feet. Let me just confirm that. Yes, it's a 25-foot side yard.
Thank you. Any other questions of staff? Seeing none, could the Petitioner, come forward, please. You've previously indicated your name is Thomas Sanborn.
Yes.
You have 10 minutes for your presentation, and just to repeat, we have to find that all 7 standards have been met, and so if you'll make sure in your presentation that you address those 7 standards as well.
All right. To begin with, my father originally owned the property, and my mother did. Back in 1968, they purchased the land and had a survey done where they had a mobile home installed on the property. And if you look at page 3, you'll see where the existing mobile home, where it was previously, was measured off from the back end of the mobile home to what they indicated was the marking lines of being 15 feet away from, let me get my glasses. One corner of the house was, mobile home was approximately 16 feet from the property line, and the other one again was approximately 15 feet from the end of the property line. My father had built the fence following the confirmation of the markers that were placed in the back northwest corner, which was a long metal rod, more like a nail, like a brass nail, with a flag on it, and had started its fence just approximately 6 inches inside that property line marker. And then he ran the fence all the way out until he started on the slope where he moved it back inside the property line to ensure that he was not encroaching on anybody else's property. That marking that you see where the mobile home is located was measured from the end of the trailer to that fence to indicate to me at that time that that was the property line, and in fact, that's what I used as the property line to indicate where the house would be built. The intent was to have the house 20 feet from that fence, but during the construction of the excavation of the grounds, the contractor marked his area, as he indicated, to me, and then had the company come in and start laying the footings in. Shortly thereafter, the footings were laid, the walls were put up, and the foundation was started to be poured. And it had just completed the foundation pouring when the municipality showed up and indicated that I was too close to the property line. And their use of the distance was with the light rail, the power pole that is situated and with the overhead power lines, indicating at that particular point that I was not within the maximum requirements that the municipality requested. The municipal employee out there said he would not stop the construction of the building, but he indicated that I should get it resurveyed, in which I did, and had a second survey done. At that point, the second survey showed, with the survey marks staked out, I'm sure you have, I have to find the page, that, yes, it's on page 4, showing the removal of the mobile home, the removal of the concrete foundation that was behind the trailer, and the removal of the patio, and that the house was actually built at an angle. And the lower conclusion was that when the footings were placed in, they were not placed directly over the markings that were on the ground for the footings to be put in. And after they were poured, there wasn't much more I could do except stop complete construction of the building and go ahead and have the hearing as we set for today. There was never any intent on my part to take any more property usage that I needed, assuming that I had assumed that it was in the right locations in the first place. And as you can see on the shed that's there, it is a portable shed and can be moved, and that's the intent afterwards. Once the house is built and the walls are put up, I will be moving the shed, and the other 2 existing sheds, the smaller ones, will be removed completely from the property. As far as meeting your requirements that you have, I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to do that. 1 through 4. to the fact that I don't have any more money to put into it to get the foundation moved, and it would basically require me to knock one complete well down, as it so states in the affidavit here, and to move it inside the 15-foot mark line. And if this happens, if I'm required to do that, then I will just have to stop the project completely and just, I will tear the foundation down as per your request or per your order. But as far as building anything there, then no, I won't be able to do it for quite a number of years. I've exhausted my funds as far as I'm. And that's basically all I can tell you.
So that concludes your presentation then?
Yes. Like I said, well, let me stipulate one more time. My father tried to follow the exact lines that the BLM had put out on that property. And after talking with him over the phone, he indicated to me that he was sure that the lines were marked, because at that time when he had it surveyed put the mobile home in, and for the septic tank that is originally in there and the well to be put in, that he had them mark the lines the same as I did just on this last survey to show where my actual property line was. And he said he had followed every property marking line that was on there. After, my understanding now, it was resurveyed again in the 1980s, somewhere in the 1980s, and thus it shows that it's been moved, but that fence has not moved since 1969. And like I stated before, from the west end towards the east, he got within, I think it was about 50 feet of the road, and he brought the fence inside because of the slope of the hill. And the marking will clearly show, if you were to go out and view it, that the fence post, the last fence post that was standing up, is approximately 2.5 to 3 feet inside the stake markers that Land Tech had placed in there to show where the actual property line starts and ends. I conclude what I've read.
Mr. Sanborn, like I stated earlier, and I know you alluded to them, staff has found that standards 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7 are not met. Have you read the?
Yes, sir.
You have read that. Is there, we as a board have to, we rely on, the burden of proof lies with the applicant for providing information in support of these standards. And I haven't heard a whole lot from you regarding those standards specifically. I have heard what you've said, and I guess I'm speaking for myself, but haven't been on the board a while. I know how these things go. I've heard what you've said about the survey of the fence, but we specifically have to address the standards themselves. So I guess I'm asking you again if you have anything further to add with respect to those.
No, sir, I don't.
Okay. I do have one other question for you, and then I'll turn it over to the board as well. Did you have the foundation, before you had it installed, did you have the location of that building staked by a surveyor before you proceeded with the?
No, sir. I went out and the contractor and I went out and measured off from the fence line, because I had assumed again that because the first survey showed the fence, the line being measured from the end of the trailer to the fence, and that fence was exactly the same distance as it was marked on the survey. I had assumed that was the property line. Now, the surveyors did not add any more markers to it until I was later confronted with the fact that I'd have to have it resurveyed again. And at that point, they came out, and I questioned them why they were using a new marking location versus the one that was originally in there that I could see, and they indicated that it had been resurveyed again later in the years, and so they'd have to operate off of that one.
Okay. Thank you. We have some questions of the board members. Ms. Croft.
Thank you. I have two questions, Mr. Sanborn. One is, on why you did not follow the plot plan that was submitted for when you applied for your land use permit.
The original plot plan indicates that the house was supposed to have been built out in the middle of the grounds. Because of my wanting to have a basement in there, the contractor went out and did 4 excavations in 4 different locations on the west side, or I should say the south side of that driveway. And it indicated that there was a water table approximately in one corner. In the southwest corner, the water level was already 2 feet below the ground. Then I went to the southeast corner, and there was water table level went to about 6 feet when the water started coming through. And then when we got closer to the northwest and northeast corners, the water table there was 8 feet. So then I asked them to go ahead, and once the mobile home had been sold and moved, I asked them if they could go ahead and start excavating over there, do an excavation to see if I could actually put the house there with the basement. And they excavated, and they went down to 20 feet in the ground and said there was no water, so there would be no problems of putting a basement in that location. So I requested a relocation of the house and went back into the municipality and told them that this is why I needed to have it done, and then and then hand drawed the new location, and that's when they approved it.
When you're saying you handed the new location, the only one we see here is not showing the house over in the new.
Okay, on page 3, you see the one that's marked out, X'd out.
Oh, yeah, okay, right.
Okay, that one, and they also told me at that time that my house was too large for the size of the property, that I would actually have to have 3.5 acres to put a house 120 by 42 or 40. And I indicated that I had told them that was just an idea of the size of the house, but the actual blueprints came out 32 by 117. So I told them because of the water table level there being so close to the ground and unable to put a basement in there, that I get it relocated to the other location where the mobile home used to be.
Okay. And the other question I had is on the shed. I mean, you said earlier tonight that you were planning on moving that shed once the house is complete. The shed that's immediately adjacent to the house.
Right.
But we have a variance before us to allow that shed to remain. I believe that is the subject of the second.
Yeah, the subject of the second item is, but in the paperwork that I read here earlier, in my original document that I got last month, I had indicated to the municipality that shed would be moved once the foundation was poured and the well started to go up on the house. I would be moving that shed away from there and relocating it at another location and notifying the municipality of its new location. And I don't know if it states that in this current one that you have now, but as far as I understand, they indicated to me at that time that the variance would be permissible while the house is being built.
Right. So does that mean that we're not really looking at variance?
Well, what we had before us is a variance for that, which would, if passed, would go with the land and be a permanent variance. If what you're saying is that's a temporary structure, we would not need to act on granting that variance. Is that
right? It's a temporary structure that can be moved. My father built it for the purpose of, he put electricity in it for the purpose of having a dryer in it, since he couldn't have a dryer in the mobile home. He did have a washer in the mobile home. But
So are you saying we have, as Ms. Croft has stated, we have 2 variances requests before us. You're saying that variance number 2, you're not requesting that variance then for the...
No, I'm not, because like I indicated before in my statement to them that I would have it moved. I'd like to find variance number 2. Where
it's on the first page, very first page of your packet?
Yeah. The section 2, but I was looking in here.
On page 4 of the packet shows the drawing, and it's identified.
Right. But I'm looking for my statement that I made. Where they said the standard is met. Yes, it says the fire plan review objects to the less 10-foot separation for review between the house and the variance grant. Okay. Okay. I had indicated, like I stated before, I had indicated to the municipality that that will be moved without any hesitation.
Okay. Ms. Croft?
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Vig?
Mr. Sanborn, I think you mentioned that you were, or your contractor was in the process of doing the excavation, and that you had an inspection from someone at the municipality came out, and although they didn't stop work on your project, they suggested that you have a survey done?
Yes.
At what stage in the construction of the footings was that?
The footings had already been done, and then the very next day, the contractors came back out and started putting the walls up, and had just finished pouring the walls for the foundation. And it was approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the municipality showed up, and they were just then starting. In fact, it was the next day they showed up as the contractors were starting to tear down the wood from the foundation, and they showed up and indicated to me at that time that I was too close to the property line because of their measurements from the power pole, and asked me if I had the power pole moved, and I said, not to my knowledge, it had ever been moved before, because again, it was my father's property when I purchased it in 2005 from him. And so I had no idea whether the power pole had been moved while he was building or not when they actually did the original survey. The municipal employee then informed me that I should get a second survey to ensure that I'm the 15 feet and that the power pole could probably be used as a mistake in locations or something of that sort. And he said he would not stop me from continuing my work. At that point, I figured if something does drastically go wrong, here I'd have the footings in. I've already got the foundation, the footings in, and here I'm going to have the walls. I'm going to start putting the flooring in, and then I'm going to be told, no, I can't do that either, and I'm going to have to tear the whole thing down. So I just immediately stopped and then called the surveyors and had them come out and do the resurvey.
So, just so I understand correctly, then, when the comment was made to you that there might be a problem and you should have it surveyed, the footings were in at the bottom of the excavation, but the walls themselves had not been poured?
No, the walls had been poured. Yes.
Okay.
And it was the next day, after the walls had been poured,
that he came out.
They came out and told me that there was a problem, there was a complaint on the location of the house, and it was too close to the property line.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Van Flyne.
Thank you. 2 questions for you. Number one, the lot you have looks pretty big, right? It's 2.5 acres?
Yes, sir.
And why push the boundary so close initially? How come you gave yourself no margin for error?
Well, I thought I had, because when we measured from the fence line, I measured off 16 feet. And we were planning on going 20 feet, but because the shed was still up, it would have required me to tear the shed down at that particular time. And I had the shed filled with equipment, such as nailers and everything else, and part of the furniture that I was going to put in the ADT for my father when he wants to come back up for the summertime. And so we had it all in storage out there. And so the full intent was at that time, like I said, I had assumed that because the fence was the property line, we tried to go at least 16 to 17 feet away from it. And so when they excavated closer to the fence line to give a margin of capabilities for the contractors to stand up between the dirt and the wall, somewhere during that time period, the wall or the foundation footings with markings were offset, because the footings down there are approximately almost a foot wide And so when it was poured, as to whether they had that footing right directly on the red line that was marked, or whether they just centered it and poured it, I don't know, because the markings aren't there or disappeared shortly thereafter after the footings were set in.
Okay. The other question I had is I guess more hypothetical, to see if you've given it any discussion. And on a practical economic basis, it may not be any better for you, but it sounds like you understand that if we don't approve your variance, that the footer has to be moved to comply, right?
Yes.
And there's
basically what it's going to require, and I'm only assuming, I would have to check with the municipality, that I'd have to come up with a new set of blueprint plans because of the size of the building to show the new size and to tear down that existing wall, which would apparently be the entire length, due to the fact that one side is a foot away from the property, the 15 foot, and the other is 2.5 feet. It would require me to tear 2.5 feet, 117 feet long, solid concrete, and move it in, which would then narrow my pathway from my basement to the little room that I have under the apartment, where I'm going to have the hot water heater for the apartment for my father-in-law, or my father, to live in. The access to that would be shut down to approximately 2 feet wide instead of the standard 4 feet that I have inside that.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you have an understanding of the cost and the consequences. And the only thing I was going to suggest is there is a body of law and doctrine that if people have fenced-off property lines and use them over a period of time, that sometimes by adverse possession the boundaries can actually change. But that can only be determined by court through a quiet title action. You'd probably spend as much on that as you would just moving your footers. But have you looked into that at all?
Yes, I have. Again, I don't know where, to be honest with you, I don't know where I would go with the BLM to find out exactly where their markings were originally back in 1969 versus what is now considered the markings, because I've been told that there's rebar that's been pounded into the ground to show where the new markings are. And I do know that Bowery Lane was redesigned once during that time period. And as to whether that stake that they used at the center of Bowery Lane as their starting point, and the surveyor himself said that he could not find the marking for Birchwood Loop Road on the southwest corner, and so he just drew it in, as far as I know, indicating this is where it should be, but they weren't able to find any rebar stakes or anything else to indicate that that's where it's at.
Thank you.
Mr. Ron.
Mr. Sanborn, following up the last portion of your comment there, I'm looking for just a little bit of clarification. The plot plan dated 2007 that's on page 3 of the staff packet shows on the northwest corner of the property found 5/8-inch rebar. Now,
Yes, sir.
Can you explain that? Is that something that the surveyor pounded at the time of the plot plan development, or was that in place and marked by the surveyor at that time?
I don't know, to be honest with you. The only thing that I could tell you is on the northwest corner of the property where they say there's a rebar mark, a stake of some sort. I did not see one there. If it is, it's way underground, and it's been buried by the dirt and so on and so forth. I did find, again, like I stated, a brass nail, and I don't know exactly how long it was, but the surveyor indicated those were generally about 2 feet long. And when I originally went out there to locate where the actual property lines were to help the surveyor on my first survey, I saw a little pink flag still tied to it, and it was down on the ground, and only the head of the nail was showing. And then my father's fence was inside that by 6 inches. And then I turned and looked to the east, and the line was straight for the fence until it started to go over the embankment, which is, let me take a look at this and I'll tell you, which is probably about 60 to 65 feet from the center of the road of Bowery Lane where they call the 50-foot easement right. So that if you went 15 feet west of the easement on Bowery Lane, that's where the slope of the hill goes down drastically, and that's where my father had placed the fence so that it was inside the trees to ensure that it was in his property. And down at the bottom where they've got the stake, they do have a stake there, but my fence line shows that the fence that goes down the embankment, every one of those posts were inside the property line by a foot to a foot and a half.
If I may follow up with two quick questions there. You just referenced the stake. Is that the found 5/8-inch rebar that's marked on that north property line just west of Bowery Lane?
The one that's that's the mag. They said that was in the middle of the Bowery Lane Road. But the stake that they placed, again, like I say, to give you a prime example, this is the fence line that my father had going down to the slope of Bowery Lane here. Their stake is here, and my fence post, which is just a steel rod, is inside the property line, and all of the markings that they showed going up that hill, where they had actually, on their second survey, did stakes up the hill, my fence shows that it was inside it until we got to the top, and then all of a sudden it started creeping over where the fence looks. It started creeping over and got a little bit wider the closer we got to the house, and then for some reason it narrowed back.
Thank you, Mr. Sanborn.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of the applicant? Does the staff have any question? Ms. Autor?
No, sir, I have no questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sanborn. With that, we will open the hearing for public testimony. Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify on this case? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one stepping forward, the public hearing is closed. Staff, do you have any rebuttal?
No, sir, I have no rebuttal.
Mr. Burkhart, do you have a question of staff?
Yes. Is Bowery Lane, is that a platted right-of-way?
It's a dedicated right-of-way.
Okay, dedicated right-of-way. And I see on the survey that north of the property is noted as Government Lot 17. Is that a publicly owned lot, or is that?
No, it's a BLM lot.
Okay. I thought it appeared on some of the aerials that there might be a house on that lot, but and you said it's a BLM lot. It's
a BLM lot, and I believe there is a trailer. There may be like a garage. There are structures on it.
Okay. And you said a BLM lot is that it was platted by BLM, and that it's not owned by BLM?
No, it's not owned by BLM, okay. Just like this is a BLM lot. It's privately owned. And BLM survey.
Right. And for measuring the size of the lot, they're allowed to count half of the right-of-way. That's correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Ms. Autor, we've received one letter supporting the request for a variance. Is that from the property owner to the north?
No, sir. That is from a owner who lives to the west and to the north of this property. He takes his access off of Valley Avenue and Sunset Boulevard. So he's behind and to the north, removed by one or two lots.
Okay, so we have not heard from the, at least in writing, we have not heard from the property owner to the north?
No, and I tried to contact him but was unable to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Ron.
Thank you. Through the Chair, Ms. Autor, a question about the AMC, which we may be granting a variance to or that we're speaking towards tonight. In looking through what I think is my most recent issue of the code, I noticed that the R9 district is dealt with in AMC 21.40.110. Is that something we can deal with in an administrative way tonight?
Say again? What reference did you give?
21.40.110.
No, this is to,
Are we dealing with a lot that's in the R9 district?
oh, yes, yes.
And I believe the quoted reference in the...
That is
Right.
incorrect. It is 110. But it was advertised correctly. Excuse me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. I have one other question, Ms. Latour. The variance request is for 2.5 feet into the 15-foot north side yard setback. What we're basically doing is looking to grant the maximum encroachment. Is that right?
That is correct.
This whole encroachment is only for that building, but
That's
we
correct.
still need to
Yes.
identify the whole thing. Okay. Thank you. Do you have are there any other questions of staff? Seeing none, Mr. Sanborn, do you have any final rebuttal that you'd like to offer up before the matter rests with the board?
No, sir, I don't.
The petitioner has indicated he does not. And with that, the matter rests with the board.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Burkhart.
I have a question for the petitioner, if that's allowed.
Sure. Could you, Mr. Sanborn, could you step forward to the microphone, please?
Yes, sir. Yes.
I don't know how the board's going to decide this action, but I guess I had one thought that might be an alternative for you if the variance is not approved, that it appears that your lot is just a little bit larger than the minimum of 1,900 square feet, and you're allowed to, in your calculation of your lot area, to take half of the right-of-way. So actually, it's quite a bit more in terms of additional width there. If your property owner to the north is likewise about the same size of your lot, that there's the possibility that you could replat if you could agree with your neighbor and move that property line and jog it 2.5 feet, and then you don't need a variance anymore. I don't know if you know your neighbor or if you entered into discussions about with them, but you could make all this go away if you went through a replat and you met the minimum size lot requirements.
Well, Mr. Burkhart, I have made many attempts to make contact with the individual owner down there. The only people that I've made contact with was somebody that was taking care of the yard, and their indication was that the owner was out of town and probably would not be expected to be back until sometime within the next 5 to 10 years. As for the reasons why he won't be back any sooner, I was not given an explanation. But that's the only answer I could give you at that present time. I did try to make contact with him. And so every effort on my part, even sending a letter with return receipt request, came back non-deliverable.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Sanborn. With that, the matter rests with the board. Could I please have a positive motion from a board member regarding this case? Mr. Vague. Thank you. You have your motion, please.
In the case of 2009-127, I move that we grant a variance from AMC 21.40.110. Is that correct?
Yes.
To allow an existing foundation and to encroach approximately 2.5 feet into the 15-foot north side yard setback at the greatest point of encroachment, subject to recommendations noted by staff on pages 12 and 13 of the packet.
And just for clarity, would that just be standards or conditions 1 and 2? I believe 3 and 4 were regarding
3 and 4 deal with
the
the
shed.
request that's been since withdrawn.
So just for standards 1 and 2, conditions 1 and 2? Thank you, Mr. Vague.
Thank you.
Ms. Suzo, you've indicated you've seconded? Thank you, Ms. Suzo. Mr. Vague, would you speak to your motion, please?
I have some difficulty with this one. With regard to standard 1, I have to agree with staff that I don't believe that standard 1 is met. The physical circumstances of the lot are fairly flat and nothing unusual of any sort other than a small part in the southwestern corner, as I understand. Standard number 2, I don't believe is met either. No geological, topographical, or hydrological conditions. Perhaps some groundwater, but I'm not sure that this structure could have been located outside of the setback. Standard 3, I don't believe is met either. The hardship was self-imposed by the applicant. As well as standard 4, I believe that this encroachment could adversely impact adjacent property. And I do agree with staff on standard 5 that is met and that it won't change the character of the zoning district. With regard to standard number 6, I believe that that's substantially met and that will not affect the health, safety, or welfare of the people of the municipality of Anchorage. With regard to standard number 7, I don't believe that that is met either, in that it's not the minimum variance to make possible a reasonable use of the land. And for those reasons, I will not be supporting the motion, the request.
Thank you, Mr. Vague. Ms. Suzo.
Yes, I unfortunately cannot support this motion either, but I did want to, I wanted to make sure that I did let you know that I think this is a really hard decision because I think that I want nothing more to support this motion, but I really don't think that given that standards 1, 2, and 3 for me are not met, the fact that even if we kind of gave you 3 and said maybe the hardship wasn't self-imposed because of the placement of the fence, it still doesn't allow me to get over the hurdle of 1 or 2. And so even, giving you the benefit of the doubt on the other standards, I just don't think we get to the substantially met part, and I feel like my hands are tied. But I wanted to, I think that I wanted to recognize the amount of financial strife that our decision is going to have for you. So which is really the reason why I seconded the motion. And I also felt that you yourself were in some ways conceding that a lot of these standards weren't met in your testimony, and that's very hard for us to overcome, or for me to overcome.
Thank you, Ms. Suzo. Any other board member wishing to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I would just like to offer, I do not intend to support the motion either, and I would, with respect to standard 7, and Mr. Burkhart had alluded to it, I would, if this motion does fail, I would pursue the option of contacting that property owner to the north. You've indicated you've tried, but I would continue to do that because I do find that as an alternative that would not require us to grant a variance and could a replat of that lot line could solve the issue. So I do not intend to support the motion either. With that, please vote. That motion fails by a vote of 1 yes to 6 no. Again, I need to state that any party aggrieved by this decision has 30 days to appeal to Superior Court. The 30-day appeal period commences to run upon the mailing of the written decision. We'll take one more case before we take a short break. So that brings us to case number 2009-134. Petitioner Aaron and James Smith Cohen is the petitioner here this evening. They've indicated they are here. The variance is for an encroachment into the required side yard setbacks. And who will be presenting this case from staff?
I will.
Thank you. Staff, indicate your, would you provide us with the sufficiency of notice, please?
On September 15th, 2009, there were 50 public hearing notices mailed. At the time this report was written, no public hearing notices were returned. No community council response has been received. The applicant, however, has provided 6 letters of support from neighbors.
Thank you. Will you proceed with your presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The R7 district requires the 12.5-foot secondary front yard setback. The petitioner is asking for an encroachment of a maximum of 6 feet into that 12.5 secondary front yard setback. Page 5 is a good drawing to show the location of the garage and the encroachment. Pages 13 and 15 are photos taken from either side of the garage. Those are useful photos in evaluating and seeing the site. Reconstruction of the garage would cause non-conforming rights to be lost and result in the need for this variance. Standard 1 is substantially met. The property owner is confined by a slope on the west side. The primary front yard along Skyline Drive requires a 25-foot setback. The remainder of the property with right-of-way frontage requires a 12.5-foot setback. There is a 20-foot wide utility easement on the southeast side of the property, which further limits the buildable area. The water well and septic systems, recertified in 2001, appear to have been placed in the most advantageous locations and also limit buildable area. Standard 2 is substantially met. Garages are common on homes in this area. To deny the ability to rebuild a garage, which has been in place since 1974, without apparent ill effect would create a hardship. Standard 3 is not met. There's a physical condition of the lot arising from the slope, and although the slope is not peculiar to this lot, slope can reasonably be a need for a variance. So in that part, the variance, this standard is partially met. The second part of this, though, the need for the variance is a result of the actions of the applicant. Although the applicant did not create the slope or plat the lot, they did purchase the property, and evidently the garage does encroach. Standard 4 is substantially met. Public support has been expressed for this requested variance. There's no structure separation violations. Drainage and runoff do not appear to be an issue. The encroachment is not visually obvious. There have been no objections from the neighborhood. Standard 5 is substantially met. The requested variance is dimensional and not a use variance. The reconstructed garage will not change the character of the zoning district. Standard 4 is substantially met. There are no identified health or safety issues. Standard 7 is not substantially met. The standard is not met because a narrower width garage could be built to minimize or eliminate the encroachment and the need for the variance. Nevertheless, the width of the proposed garage is the same footprint as the existing garage. The recommendation is for denial of the variance, as standards 3 and 7 are not substantially met. If after a public hearing the board establishes findings that these standards are substantially met, then the department recommends approval subject to conditions 1 through 3 on page 11 of the packet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Is there any question of staff by the board? Seeing none, could the petitioner come forward, please? Can you state and spell your name for the record?
Erin Smith Cohen, EINSMITH-COHEN.
Thank you, Ms. Smith Cohen. You have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Okay. Do you want me to review my answers to the variance standards?
Yes, if you would, please. And if you've heard from staff, they found that standards 3 and 7 are not met. So if you'll specifically address those standards as well as anything else you'd like to do so on the others.
Okay. Just kind of a summary. We have an older home, and the garage is, in addition to being energy very inefficient, structurally very unsound. And so we would like to remedy both those things and make it a sound structure, bring it up to code, and so forth. In our case, we have this odd pie-shaped lot, as you can see, and so there's not a lot of buildable space, as you mentioned before. So we'd like to put it in the location it is. It's a two-car garage. One of the items that brought to my attention, really 3 and 7 are addressing the same issue because, and on your, not blueprints, but I don't know what you call the measurements of the garage thing, it mentioned that we could just move the opening of the garage over 6 feet, and that's really not the case. I took a picture today because the pictures you have didn't reflect this. I can bring those up if you'd like.
If you would, we will have to retain those for our files for 30 days.
Oh, yeah.
But yes, you can.
I brought 2 if I could try to reach them.
Sure. If you'll hand one of us to the front, and we'll stick those up, and then we'll send them each way.
So that picture shows that our front door is on the 2nd floor. So if we move the garage over even a few feet, you're running into the stairs. Okay. And I measured from the wall where you go into the house to the stairs, and that's about 10 feet. So if I bring the opening over 6 feet, that only leaves me a 13-foot garage, which is not big enough for 2 cars. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay, just want to make sure we cover everything else. The backyard has our septic, so that kind of limits any building back there of a 2-car garage. The front, of course, has the wall, and you had mentioned before the utility easement thing going across. Right. Besides the hardship of, I don't see how it could even be moved, but we have 2 300-gallon holding tanks, a well pump, a well pressure tank, and so forth, all against that one wall. So all that, there's just no place to move it. A lot of plumbing issues coming in from the wall. So as I see it, that's kind of my defense for 3 and 7. I don't know if there's anything else to add about that. Because 3 mentions the reduction of 6 feet would allow a 24-foot wide garage, but as I explained, it wouldn't.
Thank you. Does that conclude your presentation?
Can I assume that since the others were met, I don't need to elaborate on those?
I would not assume anything. I don't want you to miss out your opportunity on addressing all 7 standards.
Okay. Well, I'll read over these real quick then.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. Number 1, we live on an odd-shaped triangle flanked by 2 roads, West Skyline and Sweetwater. The lot is on a steep mountain without much buildable space. There's a septic system behind the house accessible from a driveway to the rear, and the well is located in the front of the property. Number 2, do I have to read the standards?
No.
Okay. 2, there are 3 yard frontages, and technically we have no backyard. These frontages with at least that's what Mr. Albert told me. These frontages with their setbacks restrict what buildable area we have available to us. There's no other logical place for the garage since the backyard is small and holds the septic system and is the prime drainage field. In addition, a change of location would require moving plumbing and the boiler, as I had already mentioned. The front of the house is not available as it holds the well, and it's very narrow. That's kind of where the driveway is. The existing garage is unsafe, and we have letters from our contractors stating that, and not repairable. Number 3, the original building is grandfathered as it was built in the 1970s, and you can see the homes in Eagle River. Before restrictions and codes applied, the septic and well are in the original locations. We as current owners are not responsible for the plot or the original house location and construction. Number 4, adjacent property. We really only have one neighbor who has adjacent property. You can see from the pictures that the encroaching part is by the street on that steep mountainside. So the neighbors are very happy. We've got the letters and so forth, and even the one property behind us has no problems with us replacing the existing garage. If anything, it'll help the value of their properties. Okay. And so, again, we have letters from all the neighbors on Sweetwater Circle as well as the neighbor on West Skyline, which is the one that actually touches our property. explaining that they understand our intentions and, have no objections. Number 5, rebuilding the garage will be in compliance with municipality building codes and will not change the character of the zoning district or the land use. 6, the road access has a wide turn ending in a cul-de-sac approximately 50 yards long. Visibility does not change with the garage location as the setback is on a steep hill. And you can see that in the pictures. It's way above the road. An attached garage offers an additional degree of safety and security, especially during winter months. Number 7, we're not making the encroachment any worse. It is greatest at that southwest corner, as you can see on the, I can't think of the name of that thing. As-built, thank you. Okay. And decreases toward the northwest corner. While plans may require adding an additional up to 5 feet to the depth of the garage to accommodate longer vehicles, I have a truck that, needs a couple extra feet. But that will not encroach any further into the setback, because the setback is on the left side of the garage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith-Cohen. Are there questions for the applicant? Ms. Croft.
Hi. Yeah, I had a question on looking at the 2 plot plans we have, one on page 3 and one on page 5, and I guess I'm trying to figure out what if something was done in 2008. On the one shown on page 3, there was a proposed garage addition there on the southeast corner of the lot. At least it looks like that's what that is. And then it said the garage that we're talking about replacing now is shown as to be demolished. And then when you look at the 2009 plot plan on page 5, it does look as if as if that was built already. Could you just tell me what is?
Sure. We added a one-car garage. We have 3 vehicles, and we added a one-car garage on that end, so that was completed.
Okay, so the 2-car garage you're talking about needing the variance for is not your only garage. So there was a place on the property for a garage.
Just for the single car.
The single, yeah.
Yeah, because of that utility easement.
Okay, that's what I wanted to understand. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions? Does staff have any questions of the applicant?
No, I don't.
Sorry, let me get my file. Thank you. If you have a seat for a sec, we'll open it up for a public hearing, see if there's anyone from the public wishing to testify. Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify in this case? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing none, the public hearing is closed. Does staff have any rebuttal?
No, Mr. Chair.
Any questions of staff by any of the board? Ms. Suzo.
Yes, I have a question regarding your findings on standard number 3. I think I might be misunderstanding. I'm trying to understand how her purchasing the lot becomes a self-imposed hardship here, but wouldn't actually exclude us from finding standard number 3 in any case, since all of our petitioners are generally owners and purchasers of the property, and many of the geographic and topographical hardships have been attached to the land. They don't necessarily appear in a given year. So I think I'm missing the link there. I was hoping you could explain that to me a little bit more.
I think what staff attempted to say with that Part B was that when the house was purchased by this family, there was an encroaching garage, and they were aware of it. That's all.
Okay.
Mr. Burkhart, you indicated you had a question?
Yes, on the Department recommendations, there's item number 3 is resolve possible need for relocation of storm drain and pipe on the northwest side of the house with the Eagle River Road Service Area Office. Does that have any impact in terms of our decision here, or?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
Any other questions of staff? And I do have one last question. The request is to replace an existing foundation. This is to replace this, the same footprint with this new garage. So it's an existing garage. They're looking to rebuild it with the same footprint?
Possibly. Mr. Chair, I think that question would be better directed at the applicant.
Okay.
I think that there's a 10-foot expansion. Well, there's some sort of expansion on the rear of that garage.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Yes. Any other questions? If not, does the applicant have any rebuttal? Would you like to come forward?
Just to clarify on that same footprint, we were going to just extend the back of the garage, which has nothing against the encroachment at all.
And I believe you'd mentioned, that just dawned on me, you'd mentioned that same thing, same encroachment.
Yeah, it's
just
about 5 feet lengthwise, but not width, and because the encroachment's all on the left part of it.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any other rebuttal?
No.
Any other questions of the applicant by the board?
I did have one thing. When we purchased the house, I was not aware of this encroachment at all. It wasn't until I think when we started looking at construction, we put the retaining wall up, and because I remember it was quite a surprise, but definitely not when I purchased it. And I had the house inspected and everything, so just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. Thank you. With that, the matter rests with the board. Could I have a positive motion from a board member, please? Mr. Ron, thank you. Would you care to make your motion, please, Mr. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the case of 2009-134 in the R7 district, I move to grant a variance from AMC 21.40.090, which requires a 12.5-foot secondary front yard setback to allow a garage to have a setback of 6 feet at the maximum point of encroachment in accordance with staff recommendations numbers 1 through 3 on page 11 of the staff packet.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Ms. Croft, you've seconded?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Croft. Mr. Ron, would you speak to your motion, please?
I'm in agreement with staff's findings for standard number 1 and 2. It's fairly clearly evidenced due to slope and shape that this lot has some peculiarities, and those standards are substantially met. Regarding standard 3, I find that the standard is at the very least partially met, if not met, carrying forward with the peculiarities of the lot as established in standards 1 and 2. However, I'm interested in fellow board members' perspective on that standard. I'm in agreement also with staff's findings regarding standards 4, 5, and 6. Regarding standard number 7, I find that it is also partially met, if not met, in that the petitioner is rebuilding the garage on the existing width of the footprint, even though the length of that footprint, which doesn't necessarily affect the intent of the encroachment or the encroachment itself, is being expanded. I do intend to support the motion I've put on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Ms. Croft.
Thank you. I will just address standard number 3 a little bit. I think that in terms of the standard not being met, I disagree with with staff's findings in that I think that the existing configuration of the building does create its own set of circumstances there. The fact that we do have a stair, you do need a way of getting up to the front door, and that is preventing a sort of reorganization of the existing garage to make it compliant. And I think that also having because of having to have on-site utilities where the well tanks are, also affects the garage and the configuration of the garage. So I do believe that standard 3 is met. In terms of condition standard 7, I believe that it is partially met. I think that it might get the garage might get some smaller. I don't believe it can get 6 feet smaller, so we'd just be talking about the extent of the variance, not whether a variance is required. So I do intend to support this motion.
Thank you, Ms. Kraft. Ms. Suzo.
I just also want to express my support for this motion and address condition number 3 and say that I also think that the standard is met for many of the same reasons that my fellow commissioners gave, but also because I think the existence of the encroachment does not serve to negate the slope or the topography of the land. It doesn't change the fact that those pre-existing issues are still there and still relevant. And when we add on top of that this was a legal non-conforming lot and not just a non-conforming lot that had been built either under your ownership or even one owner before you. I mean, I think it was in the pre to the 1980s, so in the 70s that we had this issue, and that did make it legal. And for that reason, I think that this cannot be considered a self-imposed burden. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Suzo. Mr. Burkhart.
I don't think that standard 3 and 7 are met in this case. And I guess the reason I believe that is that the petitioner has constructed a one-car garage on the south side of the property, and if they brought the property into conformance with setback, they could still have a one-car garage rather than a two-car garage on the west side of the property. And so they do have the opportunity to have a variance and 2 separate one-car garages. And so in terms of the minimum variance to grant a reasonable use of the land, in my mind, I don't think a 3-car garage qualifies for as a reasonable use of the land. I think as long as they have 2 garage spaces, I think that's I think in terms of our environment, I think that meets that requirement. So I may be in the minority here, but I don't plan on voting for the variance request.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhart. Mr. Van Flying.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to speak regarding factor number 7 as well, but I see it just a little bit different than Mr. Burkhart, but I understand his points. The reason I think it's a reasonable use of the land, a reasonable minimal use of the land is that in our climate, a double-car garage, especially if you have a pickup truck or 2 pickup trucks, I think a garage of that size is necessary to be able to get in there, open the doors. And then on top of that, I think people need room for the things that you don't want them to keep outside, whether it's a snow blower or summer tools or things like that, that it's reasonable to keep them in this climate. And a larger garage allows that rather than having stuff like that stored outside or where the neighbors could see it. So to me, I think it's a reasonable use of the land and that the standard number 7 is met. So I would intend to vote for it.
Thank you, Mr. Van Flying. Mr. Vague.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I tend to agree with Mr. Burkhart on his interpretation of Standard 7, and while Mr. Van Flying, I think, raises some good points, reduction in width of 6 feet of that garage would still allow parking of a vehicle and storage of some of those other items, it seems to me. And in addition, standard number 2, because of the fact that it's possible to have parking for 2 cars, one being on the south side, another being on the west side, that I'm not so sure that I would agree that standard 2 is substantially met, that depriving or denying this request, that it would cause an undue hardship and would deprive the applicant of rights commonly enjoyed by other properties. I'm not so sure that I would agree with that, and I would suggest that that standard is not met by virtue of the fact that they could still have parking for 2 cars in the garage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vague. Well, I feel the need to weigh in as well. I do intend to support the motion, and trying to find the as-built. The petitioner has, I guess, walking through the process, they started with a 2-car garage. They added a single-car garage on the southeast side. I'd feel a little differently if there wasn't the utility easement that precludes them from expanding and constructing a 2-car garage on that south side of the property. But they've got a 2-car garage. I don't really think having 2 single-car garages on each side of their house is either efficient or is efficient, and they're looking to replace their existing 2-car garage. Reducing the 6 feet would effectively go from a 2-car to a 1-car garage on that existing. So again, I find that for that reason, standards 3 and 7 are met, and I intend to support the motion. I think that ran through all of us, but is there anyone else? Any other comments? If not, please vote. That motion passes by a vote of 5-2. I'd like to read for the record, any party aggrieved by this decision has 30 days to appeal to Superior Court. The 30-day appeal period commences to run upon mailing of the written decision. With that, we will take a short 10-minute break and be back here a little bit before 20 until 9. So we'll take a recess for 10 minutes. Ready? Okay. We are back in session. I don't know if anyone has come in late, or for the record, we have 3 cases remaining before us. The order of those cases is the next case will be 2009-132. Petitioner is Dan Boccia. The next case after that will be 2009-146. Petitioner Daniel E. Rush. And our last case of the evening will be 2009-140. Petitioner Paul Zahorik. That brings us to case 2009-132. Is the applicant here, Dan Boccia?
Yes, sir.
He's indicated he's here. Who from staff will be presenting this case?
I will, Mr. Chairman. 123 public hearing notices were mailed out. 2 responses have been received in favor of the variance. The request is to allow an existing accessory structure to encroach into a required front yard setback on a double frontage lot. The property is at 3801 Seaforth Place, located in the 2 area community council area. This is a conforming lot of record. It is R1. It is located on the bulb of a cul-de-sac on Seaforth Place. The lot itself was platted in 1963. And it wasn't zoned until 1965. The building, the single-family home, was constructed in 1964. A shed was constructed in 1981 and was replaced with a larger shed in the same general location in 1998. In 2000, the petitioner came forward for an identical variance to this board, and it was denied. In July of this year, they were granted a building permit to convert a carport into a single-car garage. But it was again noted that the shed encroached, into the second frontage. Staff finds that there are some unusual circumstances concerning this property. One is that it was platted as a double frontage lot in 1963 when the property was unzoned and there was no yard requirement. The yard requirements were not imposed until it was platted in 1969. There was no requirement at the time of platting to dedicate 30 foot of right-of-way on the west half of Scott Street, which is the second frontage, and none was provided. Scott Street is less than a 30-foot half-dedicated roadway. It has an approximate 12 to 15-foot constructed roadbed, and it allows the unused remainder of that street dedication to fall to the benefit of the lots on the east side of Scott Street, not to the petition side of the street. It's also important to note that there is no possibility to obtain any further dedication on the west side of Scott Street. And because of the fact that it is so narrow, although it is officially a street, it functions more as an alley, benefits all accruing to the property on the east side of Scott. There is a chain link fence. It appears to have been installed along all of the 9 lots that run the length of the subdivision to the west, sometime early in the development of the subdivision. The fence is actually located 4 feet inside of the lot line, and it is not on the lot line, so it is not on the adjacent lot line adjacent to the right-of-way. So in addition to this lot, all of the lots along Seaforth Street have been developed as though they were not on a double frontage, but so that the east end of the lot, or those adjacent to Scott Street, it functions more as their rear yard. And that is seen both by how things have developed and the fact that all of the owners use the lots in that same manner, with many of them having sheds and so forth also running along the Scott Street right-of-way. So the lot is irregular in shape. It sits on the bulb of the cul-de-sac. The front line is concave curved, and none of the lot lines for this particular lot have the same dimension. So it makes the buildable area of the lot reduced to approximately 50% of the total size when you remove all of the utility easements and yard setback requirements. There is a mature screen of trees and shrubs that also are adjacent to the Scott Street right-of-way. And that further enforces a perception that these are rear yards and not front yards. The staff finds that conditions 1 or standards 1 and 2 are met. And standard 3, I say that it's not met. On the other hand, if you find that the development occurred based on the perception of development as this being a rear yard, then the shed itself is still self-imposed, but the peculiarity of the lot would be met due to the platting and how it would preceded zoning. We find that number 4 is met because it appears that the dual front yard setback is not necessarily in keeping with the prevailing yard pattern of the similarly impacted lots in this immediate area. The only people that take there are only a few of the lots along Scott Street that take their address off of Scott. None of the, of course, the lots on the west side do. It's also noted that the housing developments on either side of Scott Street really do function as different neighborhoods. They don't access one another. There's no roadway access into Scott Street from this subdivision. That being said, we do find that an accessory shed is not a necessary use in order to establish a reasonable use of the land. A reasonable use of the land is a permitted use, which is the residential single-family dwelling. That's how we measure the test of the reasonable use of the land. So with that, we find that, in particular, Standard 7 is not met and would have to recommend denial. If you find that this is met, we do recommend 3 conditions found on pages 9 and 10. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Latour. I have one question. The request is for 100% variance. But I know in looking at the as-built and on the page 5, the staff narrative, it's only 4 feet from the east lot line. Could you explain why we're...
Well, you have to treat it as a front yard. So it's a 20-foot and a 20-foot. There was a request in 1999, I believe it was, for an administrative waiver in order to consider this as some other kind of yard, such as a secondary front yard, which would have made it 10 feet, but that was denied.
Okay.
So it's a 20-foot front, and, well, there's 2 20-foot front yard setbacks, very unusual for a residential development.
No, okay, I understand. So where the shed is located, there's a 20-foot setback.
That's correct.
Okay. However, as I understand it, the shed itself is located, bear with me, so it's 4 feet from the east property line.
Right, but it's a 12-foot wide shed, so it's 100% into it.
Man. So it's not, we aren't looking to encroach 16 feet into a 20-foot front yard setback. maybe we aren't the way I'd read 100% variance is we're going right up to the property line.
I think you're right. My error.
So, and
It's a 14-foot encroachment into a 20-foot front yard.
okay, so so whatever that math is for percentage, my brain's a little dead right now. A 14-foot encroachment into a 20-foot. Okay.
70%.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhart. Ms. Croft.
Thank you. I was going to ask that 100% question, too. I wanted to ask, though, on the north portion of the property, we have a 10-foot utility easement. Is, on the other properties that are similar to this, between Seaforth and Scott, is that typical?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Croft, I did not look at that. Let me see if I have the subdivision plat in there. In answer to your question, if you turn to page 50, it is only common to two other lots, Lot 13 and 14, would have that utility easement.
Okay, thank you. And the other question I had is regarding, it's 2145-120 on yards, about double frontage lots.
Yes.
And I believe what it says here is in the case of double frontage lots, unless the prevailing front yard pattern on adjoining lots indicates otherwise, front yard shall be provided on all frontages. In this case here, it's pretty clear that the prevailing front yard pattern on Scott is something other than, I mean, it's not a front yard pattern. So I'm wondering why that is not an applicable standard. This is how you get to an administrative waiver of the location of the shed and that setback. But it just seems like this is such a clear case where you have a pattern other than what one would expect on a front yard.
I would agree through the chair. However, as I mentioned, that administrative waiver had been denied. Now, mind you, that was in 1999, but that, as far as I know, stands. Now, the board can, of course, make another conclusion.
Right. Okay. I was just curious on your take on that. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Croft. Any other questions of staff? Seeing none, will the petitioner come forward, please? Would you state and spell your name for the record?
Yeah, Dan Boccia, the pronunciation Boccia. Dan, D-A-N-B-O-C-C-I-A.
Thank you, Mr. Boccia. You have 10 minutes for your presentation.
I'd like to start out with, I did request an additional, I put an additional request for a waiver when this came up again this year. That waiver was denied based on the fact that it had been denied before. I received no facts on why it was denied. I expressed my frustration, as Ms. Croft did. They said, that's the end of that, so pay $600, go for the variance. So here we are. I'd like to just point everybody to the as-built. There tends to be a little bit of confusion that muddies things just a little bit. If we look at the as-built on page 3, there In relation to the shed, there's a notation there that says 6 feet. That is 6 feet to the shed, not to the fence. So I want to make that clear. So it's 4 feet to the fence from the property line. I think we've got that fairly clear, but I just want to make sure that that's understood by everybody. I'd also like to point out, in the previous case, there was some discussion that two-car garage or space for two-car garages was a reasonable use of the land, given our climate. If you notice on my lot, it would be impossible to put 2 garages, and in fact, I've applied for a single-car garage permit, which gives me barely enough space to get a car, one car in, let alone anything else. So I feel the shed is still a reasonable use of the land, which speaks to item number 7 of the standards, to put tools, tires, snow blowers, lawnmowers, and those kind of things in that we don't want stacked around outside. I thought that was an opportunity that the previous case gave me to speak to. Going through the standards themselves, I think where the findings have been said, where the condition is met, I think it's very clear this is the standard of the neighborhood. The community support is there. Back in '99 when we went through this, I went to the community council. The community council decided it was clearly the pattern of the neighborhood, and they supported the variance. I felt like that still stands, so I didn't pursue another one. So just going down the list, item number 1, the physical circumstances, I think, are very clear. When this lot was platted, that the yard requirements didn't exist, and the zoning actually didn't exist. So I think it's clear that that condition is met. In number 2, we talk about that strict application of code would create an exceptional or undue hardship upon the property owner and would deprive the applicant of rights commonly enjoyed by other properties in the same district. I think it's very clear that other properties in Tudor Park enjoy a shed in their backyard, not only along Scott Street, but on other streets within the subdivision, such as Stratford and other streets there. It's common to have a shed in the backyard. So I feel that if I'm not allowed to have a shed, that I am indeed being deprived of rights that others commonly enjoy in the neighborhood and indeed throughout Anchorage. Number 3, number 1, the shed, when I originally purchased this land in 1994, there was a shed in the exact same location as the shed we're talking about now. It was an old metal shed that was dilapidated. It was an eyesore. It leaked. Everything in it was wet. And so I tore that shed down and built this shed. I had no idea that I had a secondary front yard, or that I had a double frontage lot at that time. Would have never come to anybody's question. Everybody else along Seaforth and Scott Street have sheds and greenhouses and such what in the backyard, so that didn't even occur to me. Secondly, when I went to apply for the variance, there is a sort of a sheet that helps applicants through the process. There's a couple points in that sheet that I think help us quite a bit. I doubt that anybody actually has this in front of them right now. I think I got the sheet from Mr. McLaughlin when I went in to visit, and we ran through it together. It states, here's a few of the items that are commonly used to support your case in such a circumstance. And it talks about the physical features of the lot, limit construction locations and options. There are no conforming locations on my lot to place the shed. I've taken the measurements myself out in the yard. I didn't find any place where I can put it. If you look at the as-built, you can see potentially in the northeast part of my lot that the shed can be moved there. That is out in the middle of the yard. It's not a very aesthetic location for the shed. It's hard for me to access back there. And indeed, I overlap any one of the utility easements or front yard or front or side yard setbacks by 2 feet if I move my shed in there. So that is not a conforming location for the shed. So there are no locations on my lot where I can locate the shed and have it be conforming. And that basically speaks to number 3 in my mind. going to item 4, which I believe is met, I think it's very obvious that it will not adversely affect adjacent property due to the location of the mature screen of trees. There's a fence that's embedded in concrete. That fence in the east part of my lot was built when the subdivision was developed in 1964. My neighbor just to the north watched their house get built when the subdivision was built. I consulted with them. They said, oh, that fence was built. The developer built that fence. And now, it's not a fence that's going to get moved. It's embedded in concrete, steel posts, 5 feet high, chain link. So it's very clear that doesn't disturb anybody on the east side of Tudor Park. And certainly my neighbors are in support of the variance, so we're not hurting anybody there. Number 5, I don't believe that there's any question that it won't change zoning district character. It's still R1. Accessory structures are allowed in R1 development. Number 6, I can't imagine that the shed back there is going to hurt fire department or any other safety vehicles, ambulance, because there's no access back there at all to start with. Number 7, that this is the minimum variance that would make possible a reasonable use of land. Again, I alluded to the fact that in previous case it wasn't decided, but it was alluded that 2-car garage is fairly reasonable in my climate. I only have room for 1-car garage in my lot, and at that, my garage is only allowed to be 12.5 feet wide, because if it goes any wider, I'll encroach in the 5-foot yard setback. If you look at my as-built, you'll see that it's very tight. And I do have the foundation in for that garage. I'm parking my car in there now, and we're looking around going, wow, I barely have room to open the doors. So there's not much room to store anything in there, so I think the shed is reasonable use of the land. And I feel like the term reasonable is the real arguing point there. What is reasonable? And I think I had one more item to add there. And certainly, in the guidance that's given to applicants, it talks about you must explain why this variance will give the property parity with its neighbors. Again, if that's to be considered in number 7, a lot of people in this neighborhood have a 1-car garage and a shed located very similarly as I have. So I feel like allowing this variance will simply allow me to have rights that others are enjoying in the neighborhood. Last thing I'd like to add is that there are some conditions that Ms. Arturo has recommended that I pursue should this variance be granted. I have done that, and if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to present to you a letter of non-objection.
Sure, we will have to keep that for the record.
That letter of non-objection is from ML&P, the power utility. They are the only utility that has any utilities in the right-of-way, in the subject right-of-way behind the bordering Scott Street. AWW has no water and sewer that run down through there. MSTAR has no lines that run through that right-of-way. And ACS, of course, has wires, but they're on the same poles that the power company owns, and the power company has no objection, so I feel that I've met that requirement and shown that the utilities don't have any objection. And I see in the record here that they've all responded, and all the departments have responded, either no comment or no objection. So with that, I'd like to turn it over for your discussion, and we'll answer questions later.
Thank you, Mr. Brascia. Are there any questions of the applicant by the board? Seeing none, does staff have any questions?
No, I have no questions. I would like to make a clarification, though. On condition number 3, where it says obtain an encroachment permit from MOA right-of-way, I'd like to delete that because the utilities are not in the right-of-way. The utilities are on his property. So I would rephrase this that he obtain a letter of non-objection for encroachment from the utilities, the affected utilities.
Thank you, Ms. Autor. Do you have any rebuttal questions before we open it up for the...
Just clarification, Ms. Artur, so you're basically removing that requirement because there's already a requirement for me to get non-objection from utilities.
Right, so it would read, obtain a letter of non-objection for encroachment from the affected utilities.
It's taking out the requirement for obtaining an encroachment permit from right-of-way.
Great, that's fine.
Okay.
That's all.
Thank you. With that, we'll open it up for the public hearing. Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify? Would you come forward and state and spell your name for the record, please?
Charles Crump, C-H-A-R-L-E-S, Crump, C-R-U-M-P.
Thank you, Mr. Crump. You have 3 minutes.
Okay. I am his neighbor in Lot 10, and I have no objections. I also have a structure in the same location he does. So I just would let you guys know that I am accepting, or, I guess, what am I trying to say?
You have no objections?
I have no objections to it.
Thank you, Mr. Crump.
Uh-huh.
Can I ask you one question? You have a shed. How long has your shed been in existence?
I had bought the house about 7 years ago, and it was existing structure then, and according to Dan, it was there before he moved in. So it hasn't changed. Currently I have no garage, and so I do store tools and, tires and stuff like that in there, because there's no other place to put it.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of Mr. Crump? Thank you.
My name is David Favre. The spelling on the last name is F-A-R-V as in Victor E. And I am in support of the variance. I live 2 houses to the south. And I, too, have a shed, as everyone on Seaforth is in the same boat.
Thank you, Mr. Favre. Are there any questions? Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public wishing to testify? Seeing none, the public hearing is closed. Does staff have anything else to offer for rebuttal?
Well, I would just offer this. Had the administrative official granted the waiver, that would have made it a 10-foot rear yard, in which case then we would only be discussing a 4-foot encroachment into a 10-foot. So that would be the comparison.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Artur. Does the petitioner have any final rebuttal they'd like to offer?
Just very short about the administrative waiver. If we did get the administrative waiver and went to 10-yard setback, we would have a 4-foot encroachment. When I take the measurements on that I could move the shed just barely and still meet the requirements that the shed is 10 feet. In fact, let me back up. I would need to verify, based on the fact that I have a permit to build a garage, that if I move the shed 4 feet out of that encroachment, that I would still have a 10-foot separation from the garage that I have. It's very tight. I did express frustration that I didn't get the administrative waiver, but I also understand that may not actually solve the case. So going forward with the variance, with the 72% variance or whatever we've calculated, I still think is the best option, so that all the sheds that have been in their locations for the last however many 10, 20 years can just simply remain where they are and nobody gets messed with. That's it.
Thank you. With that, the matter rests with the board. Can I have a positive motion, please? Ms. Croft.
In case number 2009-132, I move that we grant a 70% variance from AMC 21.45.120A to allow an existing structure to encroach 14 feet into a 20-foot required front yard setback on a double frontage lot, subject to conditions 1 and 2 on the staff packet on page 9 and 10, and substituting condition 3 that we obtain a letter of non-objection for encroachment from affected utilities.
Thank you, Ms. Croft. Just as a point of clarification on condition 2, that should read a 70% variance as well?
Oh, yes. Yes, please.
Thank you. Mr. Burkhart, you've indicated you've seconded?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Burkhart, Ms. Croft, would you, Burkhart Croft, would you would you speak to your motion, please?
Yes, I intend to support this motion. In going through the standards, I do believe that we have, that I agree with staff that standard 1 is met. This was developed before zoning, and it's an unusually shaped lot. We do have double frontages. We have a utility easement on there that is limiting location of buildings, and for those reasons, I believe number 1 is met. Number 2, condition number 2, because of physical circumstances, the strict application of this code would create an exceptional or undue hardship upon the property owner. I think that it would deprive the applicant of rights commonly enjoyed by other properties in the same district. I believe that condition is met. Obviously, there are an awful lot of other landowners that do have a shed or ability to store things on their property outside of the dwelling unit itself. So I do believe that because of the physical circumstances, that it cannot be met without the variance. In terms of condition number 3, I do believe that condition has also has been met. The hardship is not self-imposed. As has been mentioned, the development of this area did precede zoning, and the development of the other front yard has been developed as a backyard, really not as another front yard. And so I do believe that is a pattern of development that preceded zoning, and that is not something that the applicant has imposed upon himself. In terms of standard 4, I agree with staff that condition is met and that the variance would not adversely affect the use of adjacent property. And I agree on standard number 5 that this variance would be in keeping with the intent of the code and would not change the character of the zoning district. Perhaps if the variance were denied, it would change the character because this would be the only house without the shed in the back. Standard number 6, I also agree with staff that this would not adversely affect the health, safety, and welfare of the people of the municipality. And in terms of standard number 7, I believe that standard is actually met in terms of it being a minimum variance to make a reasonable use of the land. I think that, as the petitioner indicated, that, he, given the constraints of the lot, is only able to build a one-car garage, and having a shed for additional storage does seem to be a reasonable use of the lot. And because his property is affected by that 10-foot utility easement, and most of the other lots in that area are not, he does not have another reasonable option for the location of that shed. So I do believe this is a minimum variance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Croft. Mr. Burkhart.
I agree with Ms. Croft. I think she's done a very good job on the findings of fact, and I intend to vote in favor of granting the variance.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhart. Ms. Suzo.
I agree with both my fellow commissioners and plan on supporting this motion. I do want to point out that I think that standard number 3 is met primarily because the burden we're talking about is not the burden of tearing down or moving the shed, but the burden of not enjoying the use of the shed, which is the same burden that is placed on other similarly situated property owners, and is also a burden that hasn't changed with the upgrading of the shed or the removal of the original footprint or structure and the replacement. There was nothing that changed that loss of use or enjoyment, and so I think that standard number 3 would be met. And I think that in support of standard number 7 being met, there has been a lot of discussion tonight about how in the climate that we live in, storage is a necessity in order to maintain our belongings and our property. And I think that a shed, especially on such a small and handicapped lot, so to speak, is nothing more than reasonable.
Thank you, Ms. Suzo. Are there any other comments by any board members? Seeing none, please vote. That motion passes by a vote of 7-0. Again, I must read that any party aggrieved by this decision has 30 days to appeal to Superior Court. The 30-day appeal period commences to run upon mailing of the written decision. That brings us to our next case, which is case number 2009-146, a variance for an encroachment into the required yard setbacks. I believe the petitioner is here. Petitioner's here. Staff, could we have the staff presentation of the sufficiency of notice, please?
On October 21st, there were 138 public hearing notices mailed. No responses were received, and none were returned. As of this writing, the Community Council has not commented. The Homeowners Association wrote in support of the variance.
Thank you. Would you proceed with your presentation?
The petitioner requests a variance of 2.8 feet into the 20-foot front yard setback for an existing deck. The deck was built without a permit in 1995. The encroachment was discovered when the petitioner applied for a permit to construct a garage. The deck is ineligible for obtaining nonconforming rights. Standard 1 is partially met. There are no creeks, wetlands, slopes, easements, the shape of the lot, or other physical impediments to the continued use of the property. However, the house is located only 24.4 feet back from the front yard lot line. In this case, the 2.8 foot encroachment is minimal. The required front yard setback is 20 feet in the R1 district. There are other houses on the same street which have front decks. However, those houses are located further away from the front lot line. This front deck is really not sort of a deck meant for sunbathing, say. It's needed to bring the floor. The front door is set above grade, and there needs to be some sort of structure to stairway down. Standard number 2 is partially met. The need for the variance arises from the location of the house, which is close to the front lot line. The house was the first constructed in the subdivision. This house was the first house constructed within the subdivision. All other houses are located further away from the front lot line. Furthermore, front decks are commonly enjoyed amenity in the neighborhood. Standard 3 is substantially met. There is a peculiarity of the the lot arising from the house's location close to the front lot line. The house is located only 24.4 feet from the front lot line, leaving only 4.4 feet space for which to build a stairway and a landing down to ground level. The need for the variance is a result of the petitioner's desire to keep an existing stairway and landing from the front door to ground level. Building code requires a minimum stairway width of 4 feet. Standard 4 is met. The standard assumes the violation will not be injurious to the neighborhood or detrimental to public welfare if the variance is granted. Standard 5 is also met. The requested variance is dimensional and not a use variance. The front deck encroaches 14% in the front yard setback, but the structure itself does not change the character of the zoning district or the neighborhood. Standard 6 is met. Front deck will not cause a fire separation or access problem for buildings. The encroachment will not obstruct the clear site triangle at the corner of a cantonment court. Also, no objections have been received from the public. Standard 7 is substantially met. The requested encroachment is the minimum needed to have a stairway that meets the required width per building code. The department recommends denial of the variance subject to, because of conditions 1 and 2, which are not substantially met. If, however, the board chooses finding of fact that those two standards are met, then the approval should be subject to condition 1 on page 6 of the packet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Are there any questions of staff by the board members? Ms. Suzo?
Yes, I'm just wondering if they are required to remove the deck, what happens? I mean, what are the options for entry in using that front entrance? I mean, how do they bring the entry up to grade?
Through the chair, Ms. Suzo, if you turn to page 7, you can see the location of the encroachment and the direction in which the stairway is placed. If you look at pages 33 and 34, 33 shows you what the deck or what the house looked like before the owner purchased it. And then 34 shows the improvements that he has made. The lower left-hand corner of that page 34 shows you how the deck has been improved. His option would be to build a stairway maybe facing directly out and not facing his a driveway and his garage. He's got a nice sort of paved sidewalk in the direction of where his vehicle would be parked. But if the deck were to be taken down, you could face a different direction, to answer your question.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, could the petitioner come forward, please? State and spell your name for the record.
Yes, thank you. My name is Dan Rush. I guess official is Daniel Rush, D-A-N-I-E-L-R-U-S-H.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. You have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Okay. My wife and I purchased this house 15 years ago. I stand corrected. I thought it was 16 years ago. On page 33, you can see exactly what we purchased. We had a complete landscaping, I guess if that's what you called it at that time. The encroachment from that whole landscaping came out 3 times the distance of what my current deck does. We had a problem the first spring. We had to actually dig up after a flooding issue downstairs. We came to find out they put this whole landscaping issue in the front of the house to divert the water up and away from it. We had a lake effect on the first spring. We had water coming up underneath our foundation and our subfloor. So we dug it all up, leveled it all out, and proceeding, that front deck actually stuck out over 6 feet from the side of the house with a small sidewalk going up in there, railroad ties all built up. When that was all removed, we did not have a front porch. We had to redo it completely as it was rotted out. The picture down below on page 33 shows one of the crawl-out ports that they had for fire escape, which the windows were not properly sized for egress or however you want, egress windows at that time. The house is completely transformed, I'm sure, as you can see, and flip the page. I could not keep within the standard configuration of the old deck because it did not offer proper steps down. So we actually extended it out 1 foot 2 inches off the previous existing porch. When we purchased the house, we were not required to have an as-built. At least there was nothing in our paperwork stating that. I can take a tape measure from the edge of the porch where the supports are all the way out to our current existing road and still have 25 foot on my tape measure. We do not live on a street basically with fire hydrants and city water. We live in a community basically with a community well. Again, my house was one of the oldest ones. I couldn't change that. I had to work with what I had. I take great pride in honestly saying I purchased, my wife and I purchased probably one of the worst homes on the block, and I can honestly say now I have one of the nicest homes on the block. I personally believe if I did reduce this deck down 2 foot 8 inches, I'm still going to encroach on the 20-foot setback unless I don't know how else I can configure it. If there would be a zigzag coming down off the front to even consider this zoning variance. I personally believe the deck should stay. It's beautiful. It's all cedar deck, and it properly allows firefighter access, police access. If I reduced it down, I would be well under the 4 foot requirement as the zoning board has mentioned. The reason it's paved with this particular, we didn't want to pave it, to be honest with you. We wanted to try to conform with our old standards, but I lost those standards when I purchased, or I should say, built this new garage. I've just recently paved this to conform with your R1 standards, since I lost my grandfather's rights when we purchased and hoped to stay with a lot of the streets or the houses on the street with a gravel driveway. But we want to conform and do what we can for the community and the community council, so we did pave the front driveway and the access to the front porch. I think at this time everything that I've written is pretty self-explanatory. On page 7, it shows a gravel driveway, and that is not gravel anymore. That has been paved. We've got a complete sign-off for our garage. And again, the reason why I didn't go through this before is I was hoping that our community was actually going to go with city water. I would love to see hydrants and city lights, street lights on the street, but the community in general on our street has voted that down. They want to continue on with the well that we have, so we have a wrapped road. It's technically not a real paved road with curbs and whatnot, and this is the way it's going to continue for years to come. I think that's about it. Unless you have any other questions for me.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. Mr. Burkhart.
Yes, I'm looking at the as-built, and outside of the little cantilever, it shows that the front of the house is all one straight line. And I'm looking on page 34 on the photos, and there it appears, and on the two on the left-hand side of the page, that there's something built under the deck, and it actually looks from the photo in the top left corner like that is a bedroom or something like that with an egress window. And can you explain to me in terms of, is the wall line really out an additional 2 feet at that point there for the lower level?
I'm sorry, sir, which page were you talking about?
34.
34. What we have going up the stairway there, that's an actual bay window in the living room area. Now, down below there, there's a bedroom, page 34, bottom left, where the mailbox is. Straight back behind there is an actual downstairs bedroom.
Okay. And so that really projects out a couple of feet beyond the wall line up above, right?
Correct.
Okay. So in that respect, the as-built, I guess, I don't know if it's in error or just the deck disguises it, but there's actually building area that, for that lower level, that projects out past the face of the building.
That's the crawl-out access area, so it's not built right up next to the window, so you'd have proper access to get out in case of fire.
Okay. So in terms of the, okay, so that is a bedroom. There's a foundation wall.
Correct.
Under where that window well is shown?
Correct.
Okay. And I guess I find that interesting. I think it in my mind, it might lend additional credence to your case that if we made you, if we didn't grant the variance, that of course, since that juts out, you couldn't have a landing and immediately, go down to grade, that you almost have to push out a couple of feet here to accommodate that. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Suzo.
Yes, I was hoping you could speak to Planning Department's comment that, well, first I think I need to understand. You're saying that if you reduce the deck to comply with the requirement, the staircase couldn't be built to code.
Correct. It would be less than 4 foot, and at best I could get 32 inches.
Okay. So is there another location for those stairs that would allow you to reduce it back and change the location of the staircase in order to meet both the code and setback?
No. I would still have the steps and whatnot encroaching out to the road.
You would? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of the petitioner? Seeing none, does staff have any questions?
No, Mr. Chair.
Do you have any questions of staff?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. With that, we'll open it up for public hearing.
Thank you for your time.
Anyone from the public wishing to testify, please come forward, state and spell your name for the record, please.
My name is Christopher Reitz, R-E-E-T-Z. I'm on the Homeowners Association, Vice President, and also Dan's house is kitty corner out my front window. And as I've understood, we have no objection, and I personally think to cut the deck down even a little bit would probably make it look worse for the neighborhood than the great improvements he has made. He's set a good standard. So I want to thank you much for hearing me, and that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Are there any questions? Thank you. Anyone else from the public wishing to testify? Anyone else? Seeing and hearing no one, the public hearing is closed. Does staff have any final rebuttal?
No.
Mr. Rush, do you have any final rebuttal? He's indicated he does not. With that, the matter rests with the board. Could I have a positive motion, please? Mr. Burkhart. Thank you, Mr. Burkhart.
In case 2009-146, I move we grant a variance from AMC 21.40.030.G, minimum yard requirements to encroach 2.8 feet into the 20-foot front yard setback for an existing deck, subject to staff recommendation number 1 on page 6 of the packet.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhart. Mr. Vig, you've indicated you've seconded?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Vig. Mr. Burkhart, would you speak to your motion?
I plan to support the variance request. I agree with staff in that in terms of standard 1, that's at least partially met. I think part of the circumstances here include the pattern of development, this house going in first. Although it's not a site condition, the kind of odd configuration of the lower floor and how that projects out beyond the upper level of the house, I think, is an additional condition. And so I think that this condition is substantially met. Standard 2, I think I agree, is at least partially met, as staff indicates here. Standard 3, I agree with staff, is met. Given the age of the house, the pattern of development, I think that's substantially met. There's been, I think Standard 4 is met. I'm impressed by the patience of the representative from the Homeowners Association to come out here and stay as long as he did. That I don't think it adversely affects the use of adjacent property. So I believe that is met. Standard 5 is met. It's not it won't change the character of the zoning district. I think Standard 6 is met. It doesn't adversely affect health, safety, and welfare. And in this case, I think it is the minimum variance that will make possible a reasonable use of the land.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhart. Mr. Vig.
I agree with staff's and Mr. Burkhart's comments with regard to standard number 1 and the peculiarity of the structure itself. I think is worth consideration in this standard, particularly with regard to the lower floor of the building, and that it limits the opportunity to avoid the need for this variance. And with regard to standard number 2, strictly applying this code would, in my mind, potentially compromise the egress from that lower floor's window. And I think that would be something that I would rather maintain the safety and egress than strictly comply with the intent of the code. And with regard to 3, 4, 5, and 6, I also agree with staff that those are met for the reasons noted. And with regard to number 7, again, I believe that this is the minimum variance that will make possible a reasonable use of the land, with considering the configuration of the overall structure and what I see very few, if any, opportunities to come up with a different configuration that would comply. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vig. Is there anyone else wishing to comment? Mr. Van Flein.
Excuse me. Just wanted to add, with respect to standard number 1, I think it's substantially met, not just partially met. I think primarily because of the age of the house and how it was located on the lot. And that's the circumstances and the peculiarity of that property that they came across that is the only reason this deck and this walkway, which is absolutely necessary for the property, encroaches. So I think that's why it's substantially met on number 1. And then taking a look at the totality of the work here, from what they had when they purchased it to how it is today, that no fair evaluation of that could conclude that the the deck, the stairway, and the overall improvement of the property has been detrimental or violates the spirit or the code of the zoning that's applicable there, and in fact has enhanced, all of the values that the zoning is intended to promote. So I intend to vote for it.
Thank you, Mr. Van Flyne. Anyone else wishing to comment? Seeing none, please vote. That motion passes by a vote of 7-0. Again, any party aggrieved by this decision has 30 days to appeal to Superior Court. The 30-day appeal period commences to run upon mailing of the written decision. That brings us to our final case of the evening, which is case 2009-140. I believe, Ms. Suzo, you are recusing yourself from this case. And we'll be having a mandatory meeting at the end of this case requiring everyone in attendance. Okay, boy, that went over well. The petitioner is stepping forward, I believe. Mr. McLaughlin, assuming this is your case, could you provide us with the sufficiency of notice, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On October 21st, 2009, there were 51 public hearing notices mailed. At the time the report was written, no public hearing notices were returned or responded to. The Eagle River Community Council has not commented. The petitioner has provided 6 letters of support from his neighbors.
Thank you. Would you proceed with the presentation?
Pages 44 and 45 help give an understanding of the nature of the property, the location of the encroachment, the steepness of the property. That's pages 44 and 45. Additionally, staff took photos of, that are you can see on pages 77 and 78. 77 shows the street and the location of the garage, which is the subject of the encroachment. 78 just shows the steepness of the lot. The property is affected by extremely steep slopes. The lot is 300 feet deep with an elevation change of 140 feet, which is a slope of approximately 39%. The lot is defined as a double frontage lot per AMC 2145-120A with 2 front yards, both of which require 25-foot front yard setbacks. In the R9 district, the required rear yard setback is also 25 feet. The lot is non-conforming because the R9 district requires 2.5 acres, and this lot only has 2.2 acres. That's even including half the abutting right-of-way. Topography, easements, private well, and on-site septic systems severely limit the developable area on this lot. The lot was platted in 1973, and property appraiser's inventory indicates that the house was built in 1982. Both the creation of the lot and the construction of the house predate zoning, which occurred in June of 1984 in this area of Eagle River. Standard 1 is met. The property was constricted by very steep slopes to the north and south, which are the 2 front yards. The orientation of the original house also limits the possible locations of the garage. The lot is a non-conforming lot of record because it was platted with approximately 1/3 of an acre less than the required minimum in the R9 district. Standard 2 is met. A garage is generally considered a common right of enjoyment. Standard 3 is met. Standard 3 is substantially met. There's a definite physical condition of the lot rising from the slope, and although the slope is not peculiar to this lot, slope can be reasonably related to the need for the variance. And then Part B, the need for the variance is a result of the actions of the applicant. However, the garage is a common right of enjoyment in this neighborhood. Standard 4 is met. There are no structure separation violations. Drainage and runoff are not issues. The encroachment is not visually obvious. There has been no objection from the neighborhood, and there have been 6 letters in support. Standard 5 is met. The requested variance is dimensional and not a use variance. The garage does not change the character of the zoning district. Standard 6 is met. There are no identified health or safety issues. Standard 7 is substantially met. It is difficult to say whether or not a somewhat narrower width garage could be built to minimize the encroachment. Nevertheless, the width of the garage appears reasonable. The department recommends approval of the variance, subject to conditions 1 through 3 on pages 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Are there any questions of staff? Mr. Vig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Reading the request, and maybe it's just a matter of semantics, but it seems to be asking us to change the setback to 15.3 feet as opposed to granting a variance for an encroachment.
That's sort of one and the same. It's the phrasing of it. On the first page, through the chair, Mr. Vig, so the R9 district requires a 25-foot front yard setback, and to allow a garage, the maximum point, to allow a garage to have a setback of approximately 15.3 feet at the maximum point of encroachment. Subtract 15.3 from 25, that's how much of an encroachment they're asking for. They're seeking...
Mr. Burkhart? You're going to do that math or no? 9.7 feet?
It would be 9.7 foot encroachment.
Right.
Thank you.
I ask that because on page 30 of the application, it requests a reduction in the required front yard setback from 25 feet to 15 feet. And I know that's probably a question for the applicant, but I just wanted to straighten out what we're here to do. Thank you.
I was just looking at the public notice. I believe the notice just goes out regarding a front yard encroachment, a little bit more general, so we're probably okay to make sure we're all on the same page and get the correct encroachment down. Thank you, Mr. Vig. Mr. Ron.
Thank you, through the chair. Mr. McLaughlin, could you briefly explain condition number 4 on page 6 of the staff packet? Department recommendation number 4.
I can't recall, through the chair, Mr. Ron, I can't recall where that, okay, so resolve with on-site water and wastewater services compliance with AMC 1565050C. I believe that the head of on-site water and wastewater services asked that this condition be there, just ensuring that the on-site septic system conforms with the part of code governing that. And I don't believe it's an issue. It's just one of those sort of double-check things.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Ron, on page 24 of the staff packet is the comment, and it looks like they just want to make sure it's sized appropriately to handle the number of bedrooms.
There it is. Thanks.
Mr. Burkhart.
I guess I'm looking on page 16 and 17 of the packet, and it says a land use permit was applied for but so is the garage actually constructed?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And so it almost appears that in looking at page 16 and 17, that a permit was applied for, but no construction had started, but we do have the garage constructed here.
Yes, it is. The garage is existing. The applicant applied for a permit. It was not approved, and he went ahead and constructed the garage anyway.
Okay. And is our as-built on page 7 there? That I guess I don't see surveyor stamp, and I guess I'm surprised. Can we rely on the data that's on here? It almost looks like somebody's, scratchings. I guess I wonder if we can go ahead and approve this, given the state of this as-built.
Through the chair, Mr. Burkhardt, I do believe that we can proceed. This is an as-built that's been reduced. The sort of scribbling on here is from staff, Al's handwriting. But I don't believe that as-built is an issue.
That one of the people from Dow handed me, and I guess there is a land surveyor stamp and things like that on here that weren't reproduced in what we had available.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhardt. Staff did not properly reduce that as-built to fit all on one page.
Okay.
We apologize.
And for the record, we will incorporate that into the file, keep that as an exhibit. Do you have any other questions, Mr.
No,
Burkhardt?
thank you.
Ms. Croft.
This is, I'm trying to understand what was actually added, because it appears as if it was more than the garage that was added. Is it the whole, and the as-built doesn't really indicate that. Or, how much of the addition was a garage? Do you know? We don't have any of that information.
I'd greatly appreciate if you direct the question to the petitioner's representative. I can say that the house was in a location that was met the setbacks. The shed was not. The lot, let's see, I think I misspoke. Okay. Well, from memory, I know that the shed has nonconforming rights. The lot has nonconforming rights. I thought that the house was built in the proper location. It's the addition of the garage is the only thing that's the subject of this requested variance. So I think the best way to answer your question, and I leave it to the applicant, but that any part of the house which would encroach into 25 feet from the lot line would be addition that was made.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions of staff? With that, we'll turn it over to the petitioner or the petitioner's applicant. Could you state and spell your name for the record, please?
My name is Michelle McNulty, McNulty. I'm with Dow HKM, and I'm representing the petitioner, Mr. Paul Zahark. This application is to request a reduction in the front yard setback from 25 feet to 15 feet. We do recognize that 15.3 feet would be fine with a total of a 9.7-foot reduction. The subject parcel was created by a plat in 1973. The existing house was built in 1982 by a previous owner. In 1984, the parcel was zoned R9 when area-wide zoning became effective. In 2005, the garage addition was added to the existing house. Mr. Zahark had been erroneously advised by a professional land surveyor, not Dow HKM, that the northern-facing Glacier View Drive would be considered the side yard, not his front yard. The side yard is a 15-foot setback. He went ahead and designed the addition, had all of the construction lined up. He then got called away to go to Phoenix for a construction project he was working on. He thought that everything was in line. They actually kind of gave the additional, that's why I didn't go all the way to the 15 feet. And so they went ahead and started construction. When he returned, he thought everything would be okay, and he went to apply for his land permit, and he was advised at that time that it was not his side yard, but that it was in fact his front yard. So the garage addition was designed for the information that it would require a 15-foot setback. In June of 2009, Tim Hammock from Municipal Code Enforcement contacted Mr. Zaharik to advise him that the structure was non-compliant with code. We believe that this was a result of them closing out some open permits and not because of a complaint. At the time the house was built in 1984, the homeowner did enjoy the right to add on a garage, but with area-wide zoning, this right was impacted. The I-9 district does require a minimum of 2.5 acres. However, as Mr. McLaughlin stated, it only has 1.8 acres. Municipal land use enforcement has reviewed the parcel history and concluded that it's a legal non-conforming lot. And this variance does meet the 7 variance standards set forth by Title 21. The site has extraordinary physical setback conditions, due to the steep slopes that encumber the property. The property is 300 feet deep and drops 140 feet, which is almost a 40% slope. It's legal non-conforming, and the placement of the original house greatly reduces the amount of developable land that Mr. Zaharik may enjoy. Strict interpretation of the code would create exceptional hardship and would deprive Mr. Zaharik of rights commonly enjoyed by other properties in the same zoning district, such as having a garage. This hardship is not self-imposed. Mr. Zaharik is not responsible for the steep slopes, the original placement of the house, as stated before, the septic system and easements. And there is also a lack of design options for land encumbered with steep slopes in the zoning district in the current Title 21. The variance would not adversely affect the use of adjacent properties, nor would it change the character of the zoning district. And the public's interest is in no way compromised by the request. In fact, as noted in Appendix F, there are 6 letters of support from the neighbors. The variance will not adversely affect the health, safety, or welfare of others, and it is the minimum variance possible to bring the structure into conformance. So in conclusion, the applicant is restricted on how they can physically develop their property, given its topography, non-conforming size, and the location of the existing house. We ask that you consider this variance so that Mr. Zaharik can make his non-conforming structure conforming. And we've reviewed the staff packet. We have no objections to the conditions of approval as written, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. McNulty. Are there any questions? Ms. Croft.
Just wanted to follow up on the question I had asked Mr. McLaughlin about what the extent was of the addition and whether was that retaining wall and all of that also was that part of this project as well?
The retaining wall was in part of this project. However, the only part that's actually in the
You'll need, sorry to do that. You'll have to speak into the microphone.
If you look at Appendix B, it's page 44 in the staff packet. I'm sorry, it's actually page 42 would be a better. Yes, there's the first setback, the 15-foot utility easement, and then there's another indicated setback, which is the 25-foot front yard. So you'll see that the area of the house that's actually in that setback, that's the encroachment area.
Right, but then it does show here that wood frame addition is that whole piece in front was added.
Yeah. If you reference this picture down at the bottom.
Right, so is that whole front?
That is that whole front.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions of the petitioner? Mr. Vig.
Thank you. And speaking toward the request that you're petitioning for on page 30, is it the intent to request a reduction in the front yard setback from 25 feet to 15 feet, or to get a variance for the 9-point, what did we come up with? 7-foot encroachment?
Well, the way we've written the application, we're just requesting a variance to change the front yard from 25 feet to 15 feet, which would bring the structure into compliance. I believe that either way that you do it, it would bring the structure into compliance, if I'm correct?
The proper wording is that there's a variance for 9.5-foot encroachment.
It may seem like splitting hairs, but if we change the setback from 25 to 15, then it seems to me that any other construction could occur within that, say, 16 feet off the property line without any further action or review by this board or others.
But I believe that's always the case, and that's why it's typically there's a condition subject to a site plan.
Well, I understand if we grant that the variance is 9.7 feet, then any change that comes later would need to come back here. But if we change it to 15 feet, then that seems like that provision goes away. I just don't know what we're approving.
Yes, Mr. McGraw.
Through the chair, Mr. Vig, I understand the point of your question now. That's an excellent question. The Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals does not have the power to ever change the setback of a zoning district. All the board is empowered to do is to grant variance for a certain encroachment, dimensional encroachment. And, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And in this case, this is an already built structure, and they're seeking relief for this many feet for this existing structure. This as-built will be recorded against with the notice of zoning action against the deed of the house, and it will in perpetuity it will have this relief. To build another addition would require a different variance.
Okay. That helps a lot. Thank you.
Okay. That's okay. Are there any other questions of the applicant? Seeing none, thank you. Staff, do you have any questions?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Do you have any questions of the staff?
No, I do not.
Okay, thank you. I'll bet you can just step aside there, and we'll open this up for a public hearing. Is there anyone here wishing to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, the public hearing is closed. Staff, do you have any rebuttal?
No, Mr. Chair.
Does the petitioner have any rebuttal?
No.
Thank you. With that, the matter rests with the board. Could I have a positive motion from a board member, please? Mr. Van Flein.
Yes, I have made a positive motion.
Could I hear your positive motion, please?
Yes. In case number 2009-140, with respect to the request to seek a variance in the R9 district under AMC 21.40.110, which generally requires a 25-foot front yard setback to allow a garage to have a setback of approximately 15.3 feet at the maximum point of encroachment, subject to the staff conditions 1 through 4 listed on pages 5 and 6 of the staff packet.
Thank you, Mr. Van Flein. Could I have a second, please? Mr. Burkhart. Thank you. Mr. Van Fine, would you speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I intend to support the motion that I made, and I think sometimes the beginning and the end of our analysis is determined by the property itself, and that this is one of those cases. Looking at the pictures and looking at the description of how very steep this property is a peculiar event, number one, that's unique to the land, and number two, the fact that it's a non-conforming lot and it's smaller than what it otherwise should be, compel the circumstances where they have to build where they build, and further compel the fact that we've long since decided that garages are not a luxury here in Alaska but are a necessity. So there just isn't any room on this lot to put this garage other than, I think, where they put it, which would, to me, compel finding that a variance is a reasonable request, a necessary request, one that's not of their making, one that is not of their fault. And to that degree, I think the staff has agreed with all of that, too. The staff has either concluded all the standards are met or substantially met, and I agree with the staff to that as well. And for that reason, I intend to support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Van Fine. Mr. Burkhart.
I also think that all 7 standards are met. I was given a little pause in terms of the hardship being imposed by the petitioner. I think it's unfortunate that that the construction occurred before getting the variance. But in this case, I think the conditions of the lot, the slope, I think outweigh that. So I do agree that I think all 7 standards are met in this case.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhart. Any other board members have any comments? Seeing none, please vote. That motion passes by a vote of 6-0 with 1 recusal. Again, 5 votes are necessary for passage of a variance. Any party aggrieved by this decision has 30 days to appeal to Superior Court. The 30-day appeal period commences to run upon mailing of the written decision.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
That Ms. McNulty gave me, I think, the original of that as-built, and if staff does have a copy of that in the file, that I don't know if we need to retain that original. That might be able to be returned to the...
And we'll have to see. There's a nice sticker on it. So, does staff have it?
We do have it in our possession. It can be returned to the applicant.
All right. There you go. Just saved them $300. But, okay, that concludes our public hearings for the evening. As far as reports, I believe we're Mr. Marsh is no longer on the board, but I understand they've found a replacement that may be here next month. Any other reports from anyone? Any comments from any of the board members? Mr. Ron.
I believe the next scheduled meeting should be December 10th, which is actually the expected due date of child number 2. So We'll see how that happens, but there may be a last-minute cancellation on my part, depending on how things go.
I think there's a way for you to call in.
Yes.
Well, hopefully we won't see you. Any other comments, Mr. Burkhart?
Can you remind me, I guess, when do we have elections for chair and things like that? Are we?
Yes, I can, because I asked that question today to Ms. Chambers from a very selfish standpoint, and fortunately or unfortunately, it is actually March now.
Okay.
I thought it was October.
Yeah, I know that they switched that around, and I didn't have it straight in my head. But
Yeah, so.
you don't get off the hook that easy then for a little while.
Right. Any other questions or comments? If not, we are adjourned. I'll be able to